The meta-illusion paradox begins with a simple idea. What if reality is not what it seems? Many philosophers, scientists, and thinkers have explored this question for centuries. Some claim our world might be a simulation. Others argue it could be a dream, or a mental construct, or a filtered experience shaped by our senses and brain. These ideas are not new. Plato spoke of people chained in a cave, mistaking shadows for real things. Descartes questioned if an evil demon could be deceiving him. The modern version of this doubt comes in the form of simulations, virtual realities, and machine-generated consciousness. But the paradox starts when you realize that the very act of doubting reality could itself be part of the illusion. If we are in a simulation, what makes us think that our ability to notice we are being deceived is not also pre-programmed? What if the awakening to the possibility of illusion is just another layer of the illusion? This is what makes it a meta-illusion, an illusion about illusions. Imagine a person in a dream. In the dream, they start to suspect something is off. Maybe the sky looks wrong. Maybe people talk in strange ways. The person becomes lucid and says, "This must be a dream." They feel smart. They feel like they've figured something out. But what if the dream included that moment on purpose? What if the dream gave them the illusion of insight just to keep the dream going? They believe they've seen through the lie, but really, they're still trapped inside it. That's the heart of the paradox. In this scenario, doubt does not lead to truth. It leads to another level of the same problem. You might climb out of one hole, only to realize you're still underground. Each time you say, "Now I see clearly," you might still be seeing through a filtered lens, only slightly different from before. Now apply this idea to our everyday world. People talk about breaking free from society's illusions, the illusions of power, success, fame, identity, and self. Some believe that understanding psychology, neuroscience, or media manipulation helps them escape false beliefs. Others turn to meditation or philosophy. They say they have seen through the illusion of ego or of the material world. But this act of seeing through can itself become a trap. You believe you've awakened, but maybe you've just walked into a more comfortable cell. Even the idea of reality might be part of the illusion. We tend to assume that beneath the illusion, something solid must exist, some real ground to stand on. But what if that too is an illusion? Maybe there is no stable base reality. Maybe reality is a series of nested layers, each one appearing more real than the one before, like dreams inside dreams, or computer simulations inside other simulations. You peel back one layer and find another. The process never ends. The meta-illusion paradox begins with a simple idea. What if reality is not what it seems? Many philosophers, scientists, and thinkers have explored this question for centuries. Some claim our world might be a simulation. Others argue it could be a dream, or a mental construct, or a filtered experience shaped by our senses and brain. These ideas are not new. Plato spoke of people chained in a cave, mistaking shadows for real things. Descartes questioned if an evil demon could be deceiving him. The modern version of this doubt comes in the form of simulations, virtual realities, and machine-generated consciousness. But the paradox starts when you realize that the very act of doubting reality could itself be part of the illusion. If we are in a simulation, what makes us think that our ability to notice we are being deceived is not also pre-programmed? What if the awakening to the possibility of illusion is just another layer of the illusion? This is what makes it a meta-illusion, an illusion about illusions. Imagine a person in a dream. In the dream, they start to suspect something is off. Maybe the sky looks wrong. Maybe people talk in strange ways. The person becomes lucid and says, "This must be a dream." They feel smart. They feel like they've figured something out. But what if the dream included that moment on purpose? What if the dream gave them the illusion of insight just to keep the dream going? They believe they've seen through the lie, but really, they're still trapped inside it. That's the heart of the paradox. In this scenario, doubt does not lead to truth. It leads to another level of the same problem. You might climb out of one hole, only to realize you're still underground. Each time you say, "Now I see clearly," you might still be seeing through a filtered lens, only slightly different from before. Now apply this idea to our everyday world. People talk about breaking free from society's illusions, the illusions of power, success, fame, identity, and self. Some believe that understanding psychology, neuroscience, or media manipulation helps them escape false beliefs. Others turn to meditation or philosophy. They say they have seen through the illusion of ego or of the material world. But this act of seeing through can itself become a trap. You believe you've awakened, but maybe you've just walked into a more comfortable cell. Even the idea of reality might be part of the illusion. We tend to assume that beneath the illusion, something solid must exist, some real ground to stand on. But what if that too is an illusion? Maybe there is no stable base reality. Maybe reality is a series of nested layers, each one appearing more real than the one before, like dreams inside dreams, or computer simulations inside other simulations. You peel back one layer and find another. The process never ends. The meta-illusion paradox begins with a simple idea. What if reality is not what it seems? Many philosophers, scientists, and thinkers have explored this question for centuries. Some claim our world might be a simulation. Others argue it could be a dream, or a mental construct, or a filtered experience shaped by our senses and brain. These ideas are not new. Plato spoke of people chained in a cave, mistaking shadows for real things. Descartes questioned if an evil demon could be deceiving him. The modern version of this doubt comes in the form of simulations, virtual realities, and machine-generated consciousness. But the paradox starts when you realize that the very act of doubting reality could itself be part of the illusion. If we are in a simulation, what makes us think that our ability to notice we are being deceived is not also pre-programmed? What if the awakening to the possibility of illusion is just another layer of the illusion? This is what makes it a meta-illusion, an illusion about illusions. Imagine a person in a dream. In the dream, they start to suspect something is off. Maybe the sky looks wrong. Maybe people talk in strange ways. The person becomes lucid and says, "This must be a dream." They feel smart. They feel like they've figured something out. But what if the dream included that moment on purpose? What if the dream gave them the illusion of insight just to keep the dream going? They believe they've seen through the lie, but really, they're still trapped inside it. That's the heart of the paradox. In this scenario, doubt does not lead to truth. It leads to another level of the same problem. You might climb out of one hole, only to realize you're still underground. Each time you say, "Now I see clearly," you might still be seeing through a filtered lens, only slightly different from before. Now apply this idea to our everyday world. People talk about breaking free from society's illusions, the illusions of power, success, fame, identity, and self. Some believe that understanding psychology, neuroscience, or media manipulation helps them escape false beliefs. Others turn to meditation or philosophy. They say they have seen through the illusion of ego or of the material world. But this act of seeing through can itself become a trap. You believe you've awakened, but maybe you've just walked into a more comfortable cell. Even the idea of reality might be part of the illusion. We tend to assume that beneath the illusion, something solid must exist, some real ground to stand on. But what if that too is an illusion? Maybe there is no stable base reality. Maybe reality is a series of nested layers, each one appearing more real than the one before, like dreams inside dreams, or computer simulations inside other simulations. You peel back one layer and find another. The process never ends. A good example is found in simulations or video games. A character in a game might be given awareness. It realizes the world has rules and boundaries. It becomes self-aware. But even that awareness is happening within the logic of the game. It can't think outside the system that created it. Any attempt to do so is still happening on terms that the game engine allows. It might seem profound from inside, but it's still contained. The meta-illusion paradox is not a problem you can solve like a riddle. It's not a trap you can spring open by being clever. It's more like a mirror that keeps reflecting itself. The more you stare, the deeper it goes. Some try to ignore it. Others embrace it. A few try to live in it, but no one gets to fully stand outside it. At least not from within the rules of human perception. This doesn't mean thinking is useless, but it does mean we should carry our thoughts lightly. Awareness of illusion is not a final step. It's just another position in a long, layered structure. Knowing that doesn't destroy meaning, but it changes how you hold on to it. It reminds you that even your deepest insight may only be the beginning of another mask, another layer, another illusion. Stand between two mirrors facing each other. You'll see your reflection repeating endlessly, getting smaller and smaller as it fades into the distance. Each version looks just like you. It stands in the same pose. It moves when you move. It blinks when you blink. It mimics your every action. But none of these images is the real you. They are only reflections, light bouncing between surfaces. Yet they go on forever, building a visual tunnel of selves. The Mirror Infinity Paradox asks a simple question. If there are infinite versions of you in sight, which one is real? At first, the answer feels obvious. You are the physical person standing between the mirrors. The others are copies, mere images. But this explanation starts to lose weight when you ask what defines the real you. Is it your body? Is it your thoughts? Is it your point of view? Or is it something deeper? Each reflection looks just like you and moves in sync. From a distance, you wouldn't be able to tell which one is the original if all you had were the images. They are perfect in form. But they don't think, they don't feel, they only follow. This makes them seem like illusions. But what if you step away from your usual assumptions? What if you ask whether you're really any different from those reflections? In physical terms, you move because muscles contract and signals fire in your brain. Your body is made of atoms, reacting to forces, obeying laws. In some sense, you too are a response to inputs. You too reflect things, memories, light, heat, emotion. Your personality is shaped by your surroundings, your culture, your genetics. Just like the mirrors bounce light, your mind bounces experience. Now suppose someone asked, which is the real reflection? There's one closest to the mirror, then another, and another. As they go deeper into the tunnel, they shrink, but each one looks like the real thing. They all follow the same pattern. From inside the mirror world, if those images were conscious, each might ask, am I the original or just a copy of a copy? The same question applies to us in other ways. Are we the original versions of ourselves or just a collection of influences, echoing back what the world gave us? Take a step further. Suppose you could build a perfect robot that looked and acted exactly like you. It talks like you, remembers your childhood, smiles at the same jokes. It even thinks it is you. You look into its eyes, it looks back and asks, which one of us is real? The Mirror Infinity Paradox begins to take shape not just in glass, but in identity. Each mirror reflection shows you something that looks true but isn't. It suggests the idea of infinity within a small space. You can't count the images, you can't reach the end, but you know that the whole chain is built on your presence. If you walk away, they vanish. So in that sense, the reflections depend on you. But here's the twist. You also depend on reflection to know yourself. We look into mirrors to check our faces. We listen to others to form our identities. We compare ourselves to people, to ideas, to goals. Our sense of self is constantly mirrored by things outside of us. Without reflection, we wouldn't know how we appear. Without feedback, we wouldn't know who we are. So the paradox grows. Maybe you are a reflection too, not in glass, but in the minds of others. When a person tells you you're kind or you're angry, you begin to believe it. You reflect it. It becomes part of your story. Culture, family, and media all act like mirrors, shaping your idea of self. But who started it? Where is the original you beneath all those reflections? It becomes hard to find a solid starting point. Everything echoes something else. Look again at the mirror tunnel. It seems infinite, but it's not. Light bounces back and forth, getting weaker each time. Eventually, the image fades into darkness. The copies get blurrier, dimmer, more distorted. They look like you, but they lose detail. Maybe that's how memory works. Maybe that's how identity works too. You start as a strong impression, young, alive, forming opinions, but over time, your own self-image starts to blur. You forget why you believed certain things. You forget who first taught you what love means. The edges fade. The chain continues, but the origin disappears. Philosophers have used similar metaphors to explore the question of consciousness. If every version of you in the mirror had its own awareness, they would all be trapped in an illusion of continuity. Each would think it was the main one, but all of them would be wrong. In real life, we rarely question this. We wake up, look in the mirror, and trust that the image matches the self. But that's a leap of faith. The reflection gives no proof that you are more than an image. In physics, mirrors simply bounce photons. They don't know what they're reflecting. They don't choose. The image of you inside the mirror isn't stored anywhere. It's not saved. It vanishes the moment you leave. In this way, the mirror forces us to see how temporary everything is. Your body, your thoughts, your life, they all exist in motion, in interaction. Nothing stays fixed. The paradox sharpens again when you bring in the idea of consciousness. Some theories suggest that your sense of self is just a result of brain patterns and self-reference. You are aware that you are aware. You build a story in your head and call it me. But if that's true, then your identity is just another mirror, a mental reflection bouncing inside your skull. Like light between glass, thoughts bounce between neurons. Each time, they reinforce an image. That image becomes the person you think you are. Now imagine a person who stands in front of mirrors every day for years. They change slowly. The face ages, the body shifts. The reflections keep showing up, frame after frame, each one slightly different. Which one is the real self? The one from childhood, from youth, from old age? Is the real you the one who laughs, or the one who cries, or the one who doubts? The paradox shows that you might not be a single fixed thing. Instead, you might be a process, a stream of images constantly updated. In the end, the mirror infinity paradox is not just about glass and physics. It's about identity, perception, and the problem of self-location. We look into infinite reflections and feel like we are at the center. But the center keeps moving. Every reflection seems close to the truth, but none holds the full answer. The real you might not be the one you see or the one others see. It might not even be a thing you can see at all. It might be the space between reflections, the quiet moment when you ask, "Where am I in all this?" and wait for an answer that never comes. You have never seen the world from anyone else's eyes. Every sound you've ever heard, every shape you've ever seen, every feeling you've had, all of it comes from a single point, your own experience. This experience feels solid. It feels like you. But a strange question follows. Why does the world appear from your point of view and not someone else's? The perspective ownership paradox begins with that simple question. Why are you the one having this experience? There are billions of other people alive right now. Each has a brain. Each has thoughts, feelings, and a unique body. Logically, you could have been any of them, but you're not. You are just you. That's obvious, but also deeply confusing. Why not your neighbor? Why not a stranger across the world? Why not the person who passed you on the street today? What made this life, this perspective, yours? The problem isn't just philosophical. It's personal. You live inside a body. You see a world. And no matter how hard you try, you can't exit this viewpoint. You can imagine what others feel. You can think about how they see things, but you can never truly shift into their consciousness. You're trapped in the first person. This is what makes the paradox so strange. You accept that others exist. You know they think and feel, but none of their thoughts ever become yours. You never wake up in someone else's life. Your memories don't merge with theirs. You are always located here, behind your own eyes, inside your own thoughts. So why this point of view? Suppose you're playing a video game where you control a character. You move it through the game world. You look through its eyes. Now imagine there are 100 other characters in that game, each with its own camera angle. But you're only seeing through one. The others exist. They move around. But they never become you. In the game, this is normal. You're the player. But in real life, it raises a serious question. Why is this body the one you're controlling? Out of all the possible human perspectives, why was this one selected? Some people try to solve the problem by pointing to biology. You are here because your brain produces consciousness. But that answer shifts the mystery. It doesn't solve it. Yes, your brain is active, but so are billions of other brains. They all work in similar ways. If consciousness is a function of brains, then all those other people are just as real. So why are you locked inside this one and not another? Others turn to randomness. Maybe it's just chance. You were born in this time, in this place, into this body. That's your random ticket in the lottery of existence. But even that answer assumes something deeper, that there was a you who could have landed anywhere. That's the part that gets overlooked. Who is this you that could have ended up elsewhere? Think about identical twins. They share almost the same DNA. They grow up in the same environment. They often think alike, act alike, and even look alike. But each has a separate experience. One twin doesn't feel what the other feels. Their thoughts don't blend. Even in a case where the body and brain are nearly duplicated, each twin lives in their own mental space. Why? Imagine a thought experiment. You go to sleep, and your memories are copied into another body. When you wake up, both versions of you have the same memories. They both think they are the real one, but only one of them is you, in the sense of being the place where your conscious awareness actually continues. The other becomes a copy, a separate mind. They might say and feel the same things, but your direct experience continues in only one of them. Which one? And more importantly, why? This leads to a strange conclusion. Being conscious is not just about thoughts or memories. It's about location, the mental camera from which you experience the world. The paradox is that you never chose this viewpoint. You didn't pick your birth, your body, or your mind. But once you're here, you are stuck with it. You can't trade it. You can't share it. You can only wonder why it's here at all. Some try to approach the question through religious or spiritual ideas. They say you are a soul placed in a body for a reason. But that raises the same issue again. Why this soul in this body? Why this moment in history? Even if a soul exists, why does it see through one pair of eyes instead of another? Others look to science and say the mind is just a byproduct of complex systems. You exist here because this is the structure that gives rise to your awareness. But this skips the core problem. Even if awareness is a byproduct, the question remains, why are you aware of this particular byproduct and not another? The problem becomes sharper when you consider that you could have not existed at all. For most of time, you weren't here. You didn't see, think, or feel. And after you die, the same will be true. Yet now, for a brief stretch, you are alive and seeing. Why this moment? Why this life? A practical version of the paradox appears every time you wonder what it's like to be someone else. You can describe another person's actions. You can predict what they might do. But you never gain access to their thoughts directly. This is not a technical limitation. It's a built-in feature of consciousness. It has no center outside itself. No one else's perspective can be yours. Even in fiction, we stay inside someone's head. A novel might tell a story from multiple viewpoints. But you, the reader, can only focus on one at a time. You jump between minds, but each one is a new center of experience. No matter how wide the story gets, every consciousness in it remains sealed inside its own frame. Think of a busy city. Millions of people move through it, each with their own thoughts. But you are not any of them. You walk through the crowd, aware that everyone is living a life as real as yours. But you don't hear their thoughts. You don't feel their feelings. The fact that you exist in just one of those bodies and not another feels almost accidental. But is it? Maybe the question has no clear answer. Maybe it's like asking, why is there something rather than nothing? It might be one of those fundamental questions that exposes a limit in human thought. But even if we can't answer it, the question itself changes how we see the world. It reminds you that your view of life is not the whole picture. It's just one window in a building full of windows. You look out from your spot, but others look out from theirs. And none of you can ever swap places. The world has billions of centers, but each one feels like the only one that matters. This is the paradox. You are always at the center of your view, but you are never the center of the world. Your body changes constantly. The cells in your skin die and fall off. Blood cells break down and get replaced. Your gut lining renews itself every few days. Even your bones, the hardest parts of your body, are not fixed. Over the span of a few years, most of the material that makes up you is gone and replaced with something new. And yet, you feel like the same person. This is the object continuity paradox. If every physical part of you has changed, how can you still be you? What makes you the same person if the pieces are different? To understand this, consider a famous story from philosophy, the ship of Theseus. Imagine a wooden ship that goes out to sea. Over time, its planks rot and get replaced, one by one. After many years, none of the original wood remains, but it's still called the ship of Theseus. Now imagine someone collected the old, rotting planks and rebuilt them into a second ship. Which one is the real ship of Theseus? The one that kept sailing and had its parts replaced, or the one made from the original wood? Your body works in much the same way. The ship is your body. The planks are your cells. Slowly, over time, they are replaced. You don't notice the change day to day, but after years, you are physically made of different material than before. Your body persists, but its ingredients change. This raises a problem about identity. If your body is always changing, what makes you the same person over time? Is it your memory, your name, your personality, or something deeper? One answer people give is continuity of memory. You remember being a child. You remember what happened yesterday. These memories give you a sense of a timeline. They help connect the past you with the present one. But memory is not perfect. People forget things all the time. They remember things that never happened. People with brain injuries can lose all memory and still function. Are they still the same person? Suppose you have no memory of an event. Does that mean it wasn't you who experienced it? Most would say no. Even if you forget, it was still your body, your actions, your experience. So memory helps with identity, but it doesn't fully explain it. Another answer is continuity of structure. Even if your cells change, the pattern they follow stays mostly the same. Your DNA acts like a blueprint. Your brain retains its general shape and wiring. Your habits and responses follow familiar paths. But this also raises a problem. Machines can have the same structure. A robot can be rebuilt piece by piece, keeping the same design. Does it have identity? Does it have selfhood? Yet even this idea raises new questions. If you are a pattern, then what stops someone from copying that pattern and calling it you? What if the pattern is interrupted? If you go into a coma and lose consciousness for a year, are you still the same person when you wake up? Imagine a bridge that collapses in the middle and is rebuilt later. Is it the same bridge? People might say yes, if it connects the same points and follows the same path. But others might say no because the continuity was broken. The same can be asked about people. When someone undergoes a massive change in personality after trauma or illness or brain surgery, are they still the same person? The paradox shows us that personal identity isn't simple. It's not just your body, it's not just your mind. It's something in between, a fragile thread that ties together change and memory, biology and story, structure and flow. That thread feels solid while you live it, but when you try to define it, it starts to fray. You wake up every morning and feel like the same person as yesterday, but that feeling is based on trust. Trust that your mind is still yours, that your past belongs to you, that your name still fits. You don't check every taste. Now imagine a more extreme case. What if scientists made a perfect copy of you? Same memories, same habits, same DNA, same look. You stand face to face with your twin. They claim to be you. They say they feel exactly what you feel. They remember your past, but you know you are still you. The copy is not you, even if they match in every way. Why? Because there's something about the continuity of experience that matters. You've lived through each moment, one after the other. The copy has not. They may say they remember being 5 years old, but they didn't actually live through the time between then and now. You did. That unbroken chain of awareness, the feeling that you've been here all along, seems to be at the core of identity. But this is where the paradox deepens. If continuity is what matters and your cells are always being replaced, then what exactly is continuing? Your atoms don't stick around. Your thoughts change. Your beliefs shift. Your appearance ages. You're not the same as you were 10 years ago. Yet somehow, you still feel like you. Place each letter. In the end, none of the original chalk marks remain. But the word is still identity. It still means what it meant before. Its meaning persists even when its form does not. This is how the body might work. Your form changes, your parts wear out and renew, but the idea of you, the pattern, the flow, the story keeps going. You're not a fixed object. You're more like a performance, like a flame. The fire burns for hours, but the wood underneath is always turning to ash. Still, we call it one fire, cell. You don't review every memory. You just continue. The object continuity paradox forces us to look closer at that trust. It asks how you can be the same when nothing in you is the same. It shows that identity might be more of an illusion, a useful, necessary illusion, than a fixed fact. You feel like one person across time, but your parts tell a different story. They say you are built to change. But the story you tell yourself says, I have always been me, and both are true, even though they don't fit together. Your eyes deceive you, and they do it all the time. In fact, right now, without you realizing it, there's a hole in your vision. Not just a blurry spot or something out of focus, but a place where no image forms at all. It's called the optic disc, and it sits in each eye where the optic nerve connects to the retina. This spot has no light-sensitive cells. It doesn't collect visual data. It's a blind spot. But you don't see a gap in your vision. Why? Because your brain fills it in, automatically, instantly, without your permission or awareness. It guesses what should be there, based on the surrounding area, and paints in a picture. This isn't just a trick. It's how vision works all the time. What you see is not raw data. It's a constructed image. That's the heart of the blind spot paradox. You trust your vision, but part of what you see isn't really there. The paradox deepens once you test it yourself. Cover your left eye. Hold up a small dot and a cross about 6 inches apart on a page. Focus on the cross and move the page slowly toward your face. At a certain point, the dot disappears. It vanishes from your visual field, not because it moved, but because its image falls into your blind spot. But what's striking is what happens next. You don't see a black hole. You don't see nothing. You see something. Usually the color of the background or some extension of nearby textures. Your brain invents a piece of the world and serves it to your awareness as if it were real. That's the first twist in the paradox. Part of your normal, everyday vision is fabricated. Your brain lies to you, not out of malice, but out of design. The blind spot is a physical gap, yet you live your entire life without seeing it. The brain's guesswork is so seamless, you never notice it happening. Now consider what this means. If you can't detect the blind spot unless you run a specific test, how many other parts of your vision are also guesses? Is your entire visual field partly invented? Are you seeing the world, or a reconstruction of it? Let's look at how vision works to understand this better. Light reflects off objects and enters your eye. The lens focuses that light onto the retina. The retina is a layer of cells that detect light and send signals through the optic nerve to the brain. But your retina is not a perfect sensor. It's built backward, with the nerve fibers sitting in front of the light-sensitive cells. Where the optic nerve exits the eye, there's a hole. No rods, no cones, no data. That's the blind spot. Each eye has one in slightly different locations. Normally, one eye covers the blind spot of the other. But even when one eye is closed, the world still appears whole. Why? Because your brain guesses. And here's the catch. It does such a good job that you don't just ignore the blind spot, you don't even notice it. Now think about how this applies more broadly. Your brain is not a camera. It doesn't record every pixel. It looks for patterns, it predicts, it filters. It uses past experience and context to create the most useful image of the world. The blind spot is a small, controlled example of this system, but it points to a much larger truth. Your perception is not direct, it's interpreted. Let's say you're walking through a forest. You see trees, leaves, sunlight, but your brain is not just processing raw light, it's assembling a scene. It fills in gaps, it smooths over inconsistencies, it highlights motion, edges, and color contrast. You don't see everything. You see what your brain believes is important. That belief is based on survival, habit, and efficiency, not accuracy. This creates the second twist in the paradox. You don't just have blind spots in your eyes, you have them in your mind, and they're harder to detect. You trust your senses, you think you're seeing reality, but what you're seeing is a model of reality, a filtered, incomplete, reconstructed model. The blind spot proves it. If one part of your vision can be fabricated without you noticing, then maybe other parts are too. Maybe the whole picture is part fact, part fiction. Some psychologists use the term perceptual completion to describe this filling-in process. It doesn't only happen in the blind spot. It happens around your nose, which sits in the middle of your visual field, but is mostly edited out. It happens in shadows and dim light. It happens when you glance quickly at a crowd or a building and think you've seen more than you actually have. Your brain saves energy by assuming things, by guessing, by completing the picture. Most of the time, it's right, but not always. Optical illusions reveal this system in action. Take the Kinesa triangle, an illusion where your brain sees a bright white triangle that isn't drawn. It's just suggested by the shapes around it. Your brain invents edges that aren't there. Or look at color constancy, how a gray square can appear white or black depending on context. Your brain isn't just reading light levels, it's interpreting them. It's trying to keep things consistent, even when the data changes. This all points back to the blind spot paradox. You see, but not fully. You trust, but what you trust is a construction. And you don't notice the construction unless something goes wrong. If your brain stopped filling in the blind spot, you'd see a hole. But it doesn't stop. It keeps smoothing reality, painting over gaps, making things feel solid. The paradox isn't just about eyesight, it's about the limits of knowing. Your vision teaches you something about how the mind works. It builds a world for you to live in, stable, continuous, rich in detail. But part of that world isn't real, it's guessed. And because the guess is good enough, you believe it. You live in the filled-in version. This raises deep questions. If your brain can hide a blind spot in vision, can it also hide blind spots in thought, in memory, in belief? Are there things you're convinced of, not because they're true, but because your mind has filled in the blanks? The blind spot in the eye is physical, but the blind spot in awareness might be mental. And both do the same thing. They fool you into thinking nothing is missing. The blind spot paradox shows that seeing isn't just receiving, it's constructing. The world you perceive is part input, part invention. And the part you invent feels just as real as the part you receive. You walk through life with a hole in your vision, but you never see the hole, because your brain won't let you. Because it already decided what should be there. Because the illusion works. Because the guess is good enough to pass for truth. Pick up a red apple, hold it in your hand, look at it under daylight. It appears red, bright, rich, familiar. Now move into a room lit with only blue light. The red fades, the apple looks darker, maybe purplish. Now turn off the lights completely. In the dark, there's no red at all. The apple is still there. Its shape, mass, texture, all remain. But the red is gone. This leads to the core of the color illusion paradox. If color disappears without light and a brain to interpret it, does it really exist in the object? Color feels real. It feels like something objects have. Grass is green. The sky is blue. Lemons are yellow. But this sense of color belonging to the object is an illusion. Objects don't have color in themselves. What they have is surface structure, patterns that reflect and absorb different wavelengths of light. When light hits an object, some wavelengths bounce off and enter your eyes. Your brain reads these wavelengths and assigns them a label: red, blue, green, yellow. But these are interpretations. The color is not in the apple, it's in your head. Light itself has no color. It has energy. It travels in waves. Some are long, some short. Red light has longer wavelengths. Blue light has shorter ones. But the light isn't colored. The color happens when your brain converts wave data into experience. It's a private internal reaction. Now think about someone who is colorblind. To them, red and green may look very similar. The apple doesn't appear red in the same way. Its surface hasn't changed. Its molecular structure is the same. The reflected light is the same. But the brain receiving the light interprets it differently. The experience of color depends on the viewer. Take it further. Imagine a creature from another planet. It sees wavelengths humans can't, maybe into the infrared or ultraviolet range. It looks at the same apple and sees something entirely unfamiliar. The apple is still reflecting light, but the creature's brain paints a very different picture. For it, the apple might not appear red at all. So who is right? What color is the apple, really? That question has no answer because color isn't a property of the object. It's a result of perception. It's something that happens between the light, the eye, and the brain. No brain, no color. That's the root of the paradox. You feel like color is part of the world, but it's not. It's part of your experience of the world. This is not just a theory. It's confirmed by neuroscience. The retina in your eye has cells called cones. There are 3 types: sensitive to short, blue, medium, green, and long red wavelengths. These cones don't see color. They detect light intensity at different points along the spectrum. Your brain compares their signals and constructs a color map. That's what you see. This is why certain lighting conditions can shift colors. It's why a red apple can look dull under cloudy skies or orange under a sunset. The light changes, the cone activity changes, The brain recalculates the image, but the apple hasn't changed. Only your interpretation of its color has. Artists have known this for centuries. A painter working with color must think about context. A gray square will look darker or lighter depending on the colors around it. A blue shirt looks different in sunlight than it does under indoor lighting. Our perception of color is relative. It depends on surrounding light, background, and memory. The brain doesn't just show us the wavelength values. It guesses, adjusts, and interprets. One of the clearest examples of this is the dress, the viral photo that split people into two camps. Some saw the dress as white and gold, others as blue and black. The image never changed. The pixels were the same for everyone. But people interpreted the lighting differently. Some thought the dress was in shadow and adjusted their perception. Others thought it was in direct light and saw it differently. The brain's attempt to correct lighting led to completely different experiences of color. That's not just a fun illusion. It's a demonstration of how unstable and subjective color really is. So what happens when no one is looking at the apple? The light still reflects. The apple still interacts with its environment. But is it red? Not in any meaningful sense. The red doesn't exist until a brain sees it and says red. Without that step, there's just surface, structure, and bouncing photons. This shakes the idea that color is an external truth. You can measure wavelengths. You can say the apple reflects 650 nanometer light, but that number is not red. It's just data. The brain translates that data into experience. If the brain is damaged or missing the right cones, the experience changes. This means the apple's redness is not absolute. It's not built into the object. It's built into the viewer. Now consider dreams or hallucinations. People can see vivid colors when no light is present. Close your eyes and imagine a red apple. You can still see the red. Where is it coming from? No light enters your eye. No apple is there, yet the experience appears. This proves that color doesn't need objects or light. It only needs the right neural. Pick up a red apple, hold it in your hand. Look at it under daylight. It appears red, bright, rich, familiar. Now move into a room lit with only blue light. The red fades. The apple looks darker, maybe purplish. Now turn off the lights completely. In the dark, there's no red at all. The apple is still there. Its shape, mass, texture, all remain. But the red is gone. This leads to the core of the color illusion paradox. If color disappears without light and a brain to interpret it, does it really exist in the object? Color feels real. It feels like something objects have. Grass is green. The sky is blue. Lemons are yellow. But this sense of color belonging to the object is an illusion. Objects don't have color in themselves. What they have is surface structure, patterns that reflect and absorb different wavelengths of light. When light hits an object, some wavelengths bounce off and enter your eyes. Your brain reads these wavelengths and assigns them a label: red, blue, green, yellow. But these are interpretations. The color is not in the apple, it's in your head. Light itself has no color. It has energy. It travels in waves. Some are long, some short. Red light has longer wavelengths. Blue light has shorter ones. But the light isn't colored. Sit down, close your eyes, try to think about nothing. In that very moment, something happens. Maybe you hear a sound in the room. Maybe an image flashes in your mind. Maybe you think, I'm thinking about nothing. That last one is the trap. The thought of not thinking is itself a thought. You've already failed. This is the thought of not thinking paradox. It's simple but relentless. The moment you try to observe a still mind, the observation itself disturbs it. Like dipping a finger into still water to test its calm, you cause ripples by checking. You can't think about not thinking without thinking. That's the loop. The paradox doesn't rely on clever wording. It reflects how your brain works. Thought is not something you easily switch off. It doesn't obey commands like a machine. When you tell yourself, stop thinking, a new thought appears, the instruction to stop. The idea of a completely silent mind is ancient. It shows up in meditation traditions across cultures. In Zen Buddhism, practitioners sit quietly and focus on the breath. They try to reach a place where thoughts no longer arise. But the teachers don't pretend this is easy. They know that trying to stop thought is like trying to hold water in your hands. It slips through the gaps. The very effort becomes the problem. Say you try again. You sit still. You breathe. You think, let me clear my mind. Even that phrase triggers a string of thoughts. Is it working? How long should I do this? I wonder if this is what silence feels like. These are thoughts. They crowd the mind. You set out to build a quiet room, but you brought noise with you. Some people respond by trying not to try. They let go. They say, I'll just sit and let things happen. That helps sometimes. But even then, awareness watches itself. You think, I'm just watching. But then you're not just watching, you're commenting on watching. The self splits in two, the part experiencing and the part observing. That split is already a movement away from silence. This is not just a philosophical trick, it's how brains behave. Neuroscience shows that the brain is constantly active. Even at rest, it runs background activity. This is called the default mode network. It lights up when you're not focused on a task, when you're daydreaming, recalling memories, or planning. The brain doesn't go blank when idle. It starts wandering. That wandering is the natural state. Your thoughts drift. You hear a word, and it triggers a memory. You sit in silence, and the silence reminds you of something else. That's how the mind works. It's always moving, like a river. You might slow it down, you might build a dam, but you can't freeze it solid. And trying to freeze it just creates more flow. Now try an example. Imagine someone says, don't think of a white elephant. What happens? You see a white elephant in your mind, not because you wanted to, but because language and thought are linked. The word triggers the image. The instruction causes the opposite of what it asked for. That's the same with don't think. The command creates the thing it wants to prevent. This paradox doesn't just apply to meditation, it shows up in daily life. Try not to worry about something important. The more you try, the more anxious you feel. Try not to think about someone you miss. They rise to the surface. The effort draws them in. This is sometimes called ironic process theory. The mind checks to see if it's doing the right thing, and that check brings the unwanted thought back. Suppose you say, maybe I can catch the exact moment before a thought appears. That seems possible. You sit and wait, you observe, and then a thought comes. You try to rewind. What was just before that? But by the time you ask, you're already thinking again. Thought arrived before you noticed. The silence never stood alone. It was always part of a transition, not a state. This leads to the question, is a truly still mind even observable? If it happens, could you know it happened? To observe a still mind, you have to be aware. But awareness itself is activity. It involves attention, reflection, comparison. It's not passive, it's not blank. So even the act of looking cancels the stillness. You might imagine that in deep sleep, thought stops, but you're unconscious then. You don't observe it, and the moment you wake up, thoughts rush in again. You remember something, you form words, you look around. The silence, if it was there, was never witnessed. You can only speak of it after it's gone. People sometimes claim they've reached mental silence in meditation, and maybe they have. But the moment they describe it, it's no longer silent. It's a memory, it's a thought about a past event. Language breaks the silence. Reporting the stillness changes it. This is what makes the paradox so difficult. It doesn't just challenge your ability to control thought. It challenges your ability to even know if thought has stopped, because the knowing itself is thinking. You can't separate the watcher from the watched. You might wonder if this means silence is impossible. Not exactly. What the paradox reveals is that stillness can't be caught directly. It can't be sit down, close your eyes, try to think about nothing. In that very moment, something happens. Maybe you hear a sound in the room. Maybe an image flashes in your mind. Maybe you think, I'm thinking about nothing. That last one is the trap. The thought of not thinking is itself a thought. You've already failed. This is the thought of not thinking paradox. It's simple but relentless. The moment you try to observe a still mind, the observation itself disturbs it. Like dipping a finger into still water to test its calm, you cause ripples by checking. You can't think about not thinking without thinking. That's the loop. The paradox doesn't rely on clever wording. It reflects how your brain works. Thought is not something you easily switch off. It doesn't obey commands like a machine. When you tell yourself, stop thinking, a new thought appears, the instruction to stop. The idea of a completely silent mind is ancient. It shows up in meditation traditions across cultures. In Zen Buddhism, practitioners sit quietly and focus on the breath. They try to reach a place where thoughts no longer arise. But the teachers don't pretend this is easy. They know that trying to stop thought is like trying to hold water in your hands. It slips through the gaps. The very effort becomes the problem. Say you try again. You talk to yourself. Quietly, constantly, silently. Inside your mind, a voice says things like, "I shouldn't have said that. Where did I put my keys?" Or, "Come on, focus." This voice sounds like you. It speaks your language, uses your tone, follows your moods. Sometimes it encourages you. Sometimes it criticizes you. Sometimes it narrates the day like a running commentary. "I'm making tea. Okay, now the email." But the strange part is not that the voice exists. It's that someone hears it. Someone inside your mind listens. That's the internal narrator paradox. When you talk to yourself, who's listening? You might say, "Well, I am," but that doesn't explain anything. If you are both speaker and listener, then how are those roles divided? Who is the you that speaks, and who is the you that hears? If you split yourself into two parts, talker and receiver, then which part is the real you? And how can one part speak while the other listens without becoming two different people? This question isn't abstract. You live with it every day. Right now, your thoughts might be forming into a sentence. You hear that sentence in your head. You experience it. But what part of you is producing it, and what part of you is observing it? The paradox begins in childhood. Around age 3 or 4, most people start developing an internal voice. It mirrors outer speech. You say things out loud, and gradually you learn to say them silently. Psychologists call this inner speech. It plays a major role in memory, planning, reasoning, and self-control. It helps you rehearse decisions, review past actions, and predict outcomes. But it also leads to this split inside the mind, a speaker and an audience. Think about this. If you're hearing a thought and you didn't consciously decide to produce it, did you really think it? Or did it simply appear? For example, say you're walking down the street and suddenly your mind says, "I hope I locked the door." You didn't ask for that sentence, it just arrived, but you still hear it. It still has your voice. It feels personal, but it also feels automatic, like a notification or a whisper. Now ask, if a thought appears and you didn't choose it, who did? This is where the paradox sharpens. You are not always the author of your inner voice. It often runs on its own. It comments, replays, judges. It brings up worries. It starts arguments. It recalls memories. You don't plan these things, they happen, but you still listen. You still respond. So who exactly is speaking to whom? Some people describe their mind as having parts. There's the logical part, the emotional part, the inner critic, the child self, the wise self. These are just metaphors, but they help describe the strange feeling that your inner life has multiple voices, and those voices talk to each other. You might feel one part say, "I'm tired of this," and another part say, "No, keep going." Both voices are yours, but they disagree. You live in a dialogue, a looping conversation. Most of the time, it feels normal. But every so often, you step back and realize something odd. There's a narrator in your head that never stops talking, and someone else is always listening. That listener is also you, and yet you often feel like a passive observer. The words come whether you want them or not. You don't always control the topic or the tone. Neuroscience has tried to explain this by looking at how the brain organizes itself. Some studies show that the left hemisphere tends to generate language, while the right hemisphere interprets and evaluates. This might partly explain the sense of inner dialogue. One part of the brain produces speech-like patterns. Another part listens, but both belong to the same person. The split is functional, not literal. Still, it feels like two roles, the one who talks and the one who hears. Consider another example. You're lying in bed, and your mind starts reviewing the day. It says, "I didn't finish that report." You feel a twinge of stress. Then the voice says, "You always do this." Now you feel worse. You didn't ask for this critique, but it showed up anyway. You hear it, you feel it, but did you decide to think it? If not, then who did? This is where people start to wonder if the mind has layers. Maybe the surface layer is what you hear. The words, the sentences, the internal voice. But beneath that is a deeper self, a self that watches everything. This deeper self doesn't speak in words. It notices, it experiences, it sees the voice, hears the thoughts, feels the feelings, but it does not participate in the chatter. You've probably felt this self before. When you meditate, when you stare into the sky, when you lose yourself in music, something quiet arrives. The narrator fades, thought slows. In those moments, the mind stops explaining. It just witnesses. That witnessing self is still you, but it doesn't use language. It doesn't judge. It doesn't argue. It simply observes. And when the inner voice returns, it's the observer that notices, thinking has resumed. This creates another split. If the inner narrator is your voice and the witness is your awareness, which is more real, the one that talks or the one that listens? Which one is the core of who you are? You might think, they're both me. That sounds right, but it doesn't solve the paradox, because you talk to yourself, quietly, constantly, silently. Inside your mind, a voice says things like, I shouldn't have said that. Where did I put my keys? Or come on, focus. This voice sounds like you. It speaks your language, uses your tone, follows your moods. Sometimes it encourages you. Sometimes it criticizes you. Sometimes it narrates the day like a running commentary. I'm making tea. Okay, now the email. But the strange part is not that the voice exists. It's that someone hears it. Someone inside your mind listens. That's the internal narrator paradox. When you talk to yourself, who's listening? You might say, well, I am, but that doesn't explain anything. If you are both speaker and listener, then how are those roles divided? Who is the you that speaks, and who is the you that hears? If you split yourself into two parts, talker and receiver, then which part is the real you? And how can one part speak while the other listens without becoming two different people? This question isn't abstract. You live with it every day. Right now, your thoughts might be forming into a sentence. You hear that sentence in your head. You experience it. But what part of you is producing it, and what part of you is observing it? The paradox begins in childhood. Around age 3 or 4, most people start developing an internal voice. It mirrors outer speech. You say things out loud, and gradually you learn to say them silently. Psychologists call this inner speech. It plays a major role in memory, planning, reasoning, and self-control. It helps you rehearse decisions, review past actions, and predict outcomes. But it also leads to this split inside you start wondering one day, what if this world isn't real? The streets, the trees, your job, the faces you pass, the words you're reading, all of it could be part of a simulation. Maybe an advanced civilization built it, maybe it's a test, maybe you're inside something like a video game. The thought unsettles you, but it also sparks curiosity. You begin looking for signs, glitches, patterns, rules that seem too clean, or coincidences that happen too often. You feel like you're waking up to something bigger. But then a darker thought appears. What if your suspicion is part of the simulation? This is the simulation entrapment paradox. If you think you're in a simulation and you try to escape, your thoughts about escaping might also be part of the design. The system could have anticipated your suspicion. It could have built that very idea into the structure of your mind. So even when you rebel, you're still following a script. The paradox isn't that you might be in a simulation. It's that every attempt to realize or exit it might already be accounted for. You're trapped not just by your surroundings, but by your own thoughts about them. To see how this works, think of a character in a video game. The game is complex. The character moves, talks, and interacts with its world. Now imagine that the game is advanced enough that the character becomes self-aware. It starts to question its world. It wonders, why do I always respawn at this point? Why do the buildings end at a flat backdrop? Why does the sky never change? The character begins to suspect something's off. Now imagine the programmers designed the game so that if the character started asking these questions, it would be reassured by built-in responses. Maybe an in-game book explains the static sky. Maybe another character says, "You're overthinking it." The character believes it found answers, but really it just hit another layer of code. The suspicion, the search, and the comfort were all anticipated. Apply that idea to your own life. You start reading about simulation theory. You wonder if your dreams are clues. You feel a deep sense of déjà vu. You begin to talk about it, maybe even take action. But what if the simulation predicted this? What if it built in mechanisms to guide you back into complacency or to give you a false sense of discovery? The moment you think you're resisting, you're actually complying. This becomes more disturbing when you remember how real our own simulations already are. Video games, virtual reality, and AI models all simulate environments. In games like The Sims, players control characters who live full lives, unaware that someone watches them. These characters don't know they're being manipulated, and yet their thoughts, choices, and routines unfold within strict boundaries. They might appear to choose freely, but their world limits them at every step. If you were in their place, how would you know? Suppose you try to test reality. You look for inconsistencies, you question your past, you examine your senses. But all your tools for testing reality are part of the system. Your thoughts come from your brain. Your brain is built on biology. Biology follows physical laws. If those laws are simulated, then your thinking itself is happening inside the code. So how do you escape? You can't simply think your way out, because thought might be part of the trap. This is the core of the paradox. The very process of realizing you're in a simulation might be exactly what the simulation expects you to do. Your resistance could be reinforcement. Your questions could be cues that keep the illusion stable. The system doesn't need to stop you. It only needs to make you believe you're getting closer to the truth while still staying inside the loop. This leads to a kind of mental cage. Every time you feel like you're about to step out, the floor extends. Every time you think, I've figured it out, a new door appears, but it leads to another room in the same building. The idea of freedom becomes part of the structure. Take a real-world example, a lucid dream. You realize you're dreaming. You take control. You fly, you change the setting, but you never wake up. You just create a more complex dream. Even though you feel empowered, you're still asleep. The simulation entrapment paradox says the same might apply to waking life. Awareness itself could be a feature, not a bug. The simulation might be designed to give you moments of realization as a kind of pressure valve. You suspect, you explore, you feel smart. Then you get distracted, or satisfied, or lost in another puzzle. The system continues. Think of a person stuck in a maze. Each time they reach a dead end, they believe they've learned something. They update their strategy. They feel progress. But the maze adapts. It rearranges just enough to stay one step ahead. The person never questions the maze itself. They believe the goal is to get out. But what if the goal is to keep them busy? This theory turns introspection into a trap. You question everything, but the questioning itself is already absorbed into the structure. The more you look, the more mirrors you find, and each mirror reflects your search back at you. Even language becomes suspect. You say, "This feels programmed," but the word programmed is one you learned from within the system. Your ideas about computers, simulations, philosophy all came from books, screens, or people. If the world is simulated, so is your knowledge of the word simulation. You are using the tools the system gave you to try to undo the system. It's like trying to delete software using a program that the software itself provided. And yet, this doesn't mean you're helpless, but it does mean that certainty is no longer possible. You can't be sure your rebellion is real. You can't be sure your doubt is genuine. The moment you try to step outside, the system might pull the outside in. The simulation entrapment paradox doesn't say you are definitely in a simulation. It says that if you are, your very effort to prove or escape it might already be simulated. That makes it different from ordinary doubt. It's not just that you might be wrong, it's that your methods of finding truth could be controlled. You think you're hacking the system, but the system already includes your attempt to hack it. So where does that leave you? Trapped in a loop of self-reference, like a book that contains a chapter about itself, like a painting of an artist painting himself. You look for a way out, and the map leads back to where you started. Not because you failed, but because the illusion was designed that way. Because even your suspicion might be a feature, not a flaw. Because your thoughts, no matter how radical, might be part of the plan. You walk into a clinic, you sign the forms. A technician leads you to a white chair under soft lights. They explain the procedure. A memory will be removed. Not blocked, not blurred, erased, gone from your mind. You agree. You lie back, you close your eyes. A moment later, the machine hums. Then it stops. You open your eyes, the memory is gone. Now ask yourself, what exactly is gone? You don't know. That's the point. You remember arriving at the clinic. You remember agreeing to forget something, but the thing itself, whatever it was, is missing. It's not like a blurry photo. It's like a photo that was never taken. You can't picture the event. You can't name the people. You can't feel the emotions tied to it. It left no trace. And because of that, you can't regret it. Not directly. You can't miss something when you don't even know it existed. This is the memory deletion paradox. If a memory is truly deleted, you lose not just the details of the event, but also your awareness of having forgotten anything. You can't grieve what's missing because you have no access to what's gone. It's not like forgetting where you left your keys. It's like forgetting you ever owned keys at all. That creates a strange problem. Suppose the memory was painful. Maybe it involved a loss, a betrayal, or an embarrassing mistake. You might think, if I could just forget this, I'd feel better. And maybe you would. But the pain of memory has a function. It shapes who you are. It influences your decisions. It adds weight to your relationships. It even protects you. You remember the fire so you don't touch the stove again. If you delete the memory, you risk losing the lesson. But suppose you delete the memory and the lesson somehow survives. You're still cautious. You still flinch when you hear certain words. You don't know why. You just do. This means a piece of the experience lingers, even if the event is gone. The memory is deleted, but its effects are not. That makes things more confusing. You feel uneasy, but you don't know the source. You act in certain ways, but can't explain why. You carry a weight that has no name. That's one version of the paradox, the emotional echo. You forget the event, but not the imprint it left on your nervous system. Your body remembers, your behavior changes, but your mind has no story to attach to those changes. You can't understand yourself fully, because the cause is hidden. You are shaped by something you can't recall. Now flip the problem. What if the deletion is complete? No memory, no emotion, no trace. You've lost the event and its impact. That sounds cleaner. But now another issue appears. If the experience truly shaped you, if it changed how you see people, or how you trust, or how you value things, then deleting it changes you back. But you won't notice, because the change feels normal. You can't compare it to the version of yourself that existed before. You can't say, I used to care more, or I used to avoid this. You just are the way you are now. The past is gone, and so is your sense of who you used to be. Imagine you once loved someone deeply. That relationship ended badly. You carried the memory for years. Then you chose to delete it. Now you walk past places that meant something, but they don't stir you. You see photos of someone you once held close, but they don't touch you. You hear a song that once made you cry, but now it's just noise. You don't feel loss, you don't miss anything, and yet a part of you is missing. You've lost not just a person, but the feeling of ever having cared. This points to the second layer of the paradox. Deleting memory removes the reason for regret, but might leave you with a subtle sense that something is off. You feel emptier, lighter, maybe, but also less connected. Memory gives life depth. It gives moments context. If you erase enough of it, life becomes thinner. Not painful, but flat. Then comes the bigger question. If you can't regret what you don't remember, is regret a valid reason to keep painful memories? Suppose you erase a terrible mistake. You no longer feel guilt. You no longer lie awake thinking about it. You feel peace. But is it real peace or just ignorance? You didn't become wiser. You became lighter by removing a weight. But now you lack the evidence that the mistake ever happened. If someone asks you about it, you say, I don't know what you mean. You don't remember the apology. You don't remember the hurt. You can't learn from what you never knew. That leads to the third twist. Suppose a friend tells you, you once betrayed me, and then you erased it from your mind. You respond, I don't remember that. The friend says, exactly, that's the problem. From their view, you did something and then chose not to remember. From your view, you didn't do anything at all. Who's right? This becomes a moral issue. If you delete a memory, are you still responsible for it? If you don't remember a promise, are you still bound by it? If you don't recall the harm you caused, are you still accountable? The paradox says yes and no. You are not the same person you were, but you also didn't get there honestly. You edited yourself. You cut out a part of your history. There's another danger here. Once you start deleting, where do you stop? If every unpleasant moment becomes optional, you could create a version of yourself with no friction, no guilt, no fear, no sadness, but that version wouldn't be whole. it would be shallow. The hard parts of memory give you strength, empathy, and depth. They hurt, yes, but they also teach. You might say, then I'll just delete the worst one. But even that assumes you can judge the value of a memory before you erase it. How do you know what you're giving up if you don't know what it is? What if that pain shaped your greatest insight? What if that mistake made you kinder? If you delete the source, do you lose the growth? The paradox tightens again. To regret a memory, you must keep it. But once you delete it, the regret disappears, along with the reason you wanted it gone. You solve the problem by removing it from your awareness. But in doing so, you erase your sense of having ever had a problem at all. In that way, memory deletion becomes a kind of self-erasure. You don't just forget facts. You forget being the person who lived through them. You trade pain for peace, but the peace is based on not knowing. And if you don't know what you lost, can you truly say you're better off? You walk out of the clinic feeling lighter. You smile without knowing why. Something has changed, but you can't name it. You don't miss anything. But deep down, something inside you has been rearranged. And you'll never know what it was, because knowing is exactly what you gave up. At age 5, you had different thoughts, fears, and goals. You liked different foods. You spoke in a higher voice. Your hands were smaller. Your understanding of the world was narrow. You may have believed in things you now find silly. You cried more easily. You trusted more freely. You had no idea who you would become. Now look at yourself today. You carry a phone. You work or study. You've lived through pain, joy, and failure. You've built preferences, beliefs, and habits. You look in the mirror and think, this is me. But is it? That's the heart of the false continuity paradox. You are not the same person you were at 5 years old. Your body has changed. Your brain has rewired. Your memories have faded or twisted. Yet, you still say, that was me. You look at a photo from your childhood and feel a quiet ownership of that face. But if everything has changed, what makes that child you? One answer people give is memory. You remember being 5. You recall a birthday, a toy, a teacher. These memories act like threads tying past and present together. But memory is not reliable. You forget most of what you experienced. You misremember events. You invent details that never happened. Worse, you remember things told to you by others and adopt them as your own. So if memory is full of holes, how can it connect your different selves? Suppose you meet someone who has amnesia. They lost all memory of their childhood. They don't remember their parents, school, or name. Are they still the same person? Most people would say yes. The body is still there. The brain still functions. But that raises a deeper issue. If memory can be erased and identity survives, then memory can't be the full answer. So maybe you say it's the body that connects all the yous through time. But that body isn't stable either. Cells die and regenerate. Your skin replaces itself every few weeks. Your blood cells last months. Your bones rebuild over years. Even your brain reshapes itself with new connections and pathways. After decades, nearly every atom in your body has been replaced. If you're made of new parts, how can you be the same person? There's a thought experiment called the ship of Theseus. A ship loses planks to rot. They're replaced one by one. After years, none of the original parts remain. Is it still the same ship? Most people say yes, because the change was gradual, and the shape remained. But if someone builds a new ship from the old planks, now there are 2 ships. Which is the real one? Apply that to your life. Your past selves are like old planks. They've been replaced, physically, mentally, emotionally. But the change was slow, so it felt natural. You didn't notice the shift from child to teen or from teen to adult. The transitions were smooth. But if you met your 5-year-old self today, would you feel like you were meeting yourself or someone else entirely? Maybe it's your name that holds things together. You've been called by the same name since childhood. That label provides a sense of stability. But names are external. They can be changed. People change names when they marry, when they switch cultures, when they escape the past. A name helps others track you. It doesn't prove who you are inside. Then there's the idea of personality. Maybe you've always been curious, or shy, or generous. These traits form a core identity. But studies in psychology show that personality changes over time. People become more conscientious as they age. They become less impulsive. Their sense of humor evolves. Trauma, love, illness, and success all reshape the mind. You are not who you used to be, not just in thought, but in temperament. So what remains? There's a feeling that you've always been you, that no matter the change, a sense of presence continued. You felt the world from the inside. You saw through your own eyes. That inner point of view, the first-person experience, stayed with you. Even if your thoughts, memories, and body changed, your awareness felt stable. But here's the twist. That feeling might be an illusion. Just like a movie feels like a single story, even though it's made of thousands of still images, your life feels continuous because your brain stitches it together. Each day you wake up and the brain builds a sense of self. It says, I am the same as yesterday. But it might just be using yesterday's memory and today's body to fake continuity. You believe you're the same person through time because the mind creates that belief. It's useful. It helps you function. It helps you keep promises, plan for the future, and carry regret or pride. But it may not reflect reality. The person who wanted a toy at age 5 and the person who reads this now are not the same in any measurable way, except for the story you've told yourself. This story is strong. It says, that was me, and it feels true. But if someone else had lived your exact childhood, same parents, same events, but then had all your current memories implanted, would they be you, or would they be a copy? What matters more, living through the events or remembering them? The paradox won't let you say for sure. Some philosophers suggest that identity is a useful fiction. You are not a single self moving through time. You are a sequence of related selves, like a TV series with many seasons. Each season builds on the last, but the characters change. Some disappear, some return in new forms. The audience says this is the same show, but deep down, they know each season has a life of its own. Your 5-year-old self was a season. So was your teenage self. So is your current self. They share a name, they follow one another, but they are not the same. They hold different views, they react differently, they dream differently, and if you met them now, you might not even like them. The false continuity paradox asks you to look at your life not as a single thread, but as a rope made of many threads, twisted together. Each year adds a new strand. Some break off, some stay, but the rope holds. It gives you a sense of wholeness. Yet when you pull it apart, you see it was never one thing, just many selves passing through one body, believing they are one. You wake up, stretch, and decide to have coffee instead of tea. It feels like a choice. You think about your options, remember yesterday's bitter tea, and reach for the coffee. You believe you acted freely. But what if that decision wasn't yours? Not really. The free will backfire begins here. Neuroscience suggests that many of our decisions happen before we're aware of them. Electrical signals in the brain, measurable impulses, can show up several hundred milliseconds before you consciously decide to act. That gap is small, but meaningful. It suggests that by the time you feel like you're choosing, your brain has already set the plan in motion. In the 1980s, researcher Benjamin Libet ran a series of experiments that became famous. He asked participants to flex their wrists at a moment of their choosing. He told them to watch a clock and note the exact moment they became aware of their intention to move. Meanwhile, he recorded brain activity using EEG. The results were strange. Brain signals called readiness potentials appeared about 300 milliseconds before the person became aware of their intention. The brain had started preparing the action before the person knew they wanted to do it. This doesn't prove that free will doesn't exist. But it does raise a serious question. If your brain acts before your conscious self does, who is really in charge? Supporters of free will say that we still have control. We can veto actions. Libet himself proposed this idea. The brain may start the process, but the conscious mind can stop it. You might feel the urge to speak, but decide to stay silent. You may want to lash out, but choose restraint. But even this veto power may be just another brain event, one that feels conscious only because of how the system reports itself. If you zoom out, the problem gets more tangled. Your brain is a physical object. It obeys physical laws. Neurons fire in patterns based on chemistry, biology, and past experience. Each decision is shaped by past learning, genetic wiring, emotional states, and context. You didn't choose your genes. You didn't pick your childhood. You didn't decide the events that shaped your personality. Yet all these factors shape what feels like your choices. Suppose a person grows up in a violent home. They learn to respond to stress with anger. At age 30, they lose their temper at work. Did they choose to explode, or did decades of conditioning and neural reinforcement create a pattern that fired automatically? The brain makes predictions, responds to cues, and reinforces habits. Most of this happens below awareness, but we still say they chose to act that way. Now take a step back and look at yourself. Think about your last big decision. Something like changing jobs, ending a relationship, or moving cities. It probably felt deliberate. You thought it through. You weighed pros and cons. But even that process came from somewhere. You had preferences. You had emotions. You had goals that were shaped by earlier events. Your decision was not made in a vacuum. It followed from who you already were, and that you was shaped long before the moment of choice. If every choice arises from unconscious patterns, is there any part of us that truly chooses? This is where the paradox strikes hardest. The more we understand the brain, the less room there seems to be for free will. We wanted science to explain the mind. It did, but the explanation backfires. It shows that what we call will may just be the brain doing what it always does: compute, predict, react. Free will becomes a story the brain tells itself after the fact, a feeling of control layered over an automatic process. That story is convincing because it has to be. The sense of being a self that chooses is central to human experience. Without it, responsibility becomes questionable. Morality becomes confusing. If a murderer acted on impulses they didn't consciously create, are they guilty in the way we normally believe? If a kind act was the result of good wiring and a peaceful upbringing, is the person really virtuous? The legal system, religion, and culture all assume that people have free will. They act as if people could have done otherwise. But if the brain never offered a real alternative, what does could have mean? Still, we live as if we choose. You get up, go to work, decide what to eat. It feels like agency. But this agency may be like the dashboard in a plane simulator. Lights flash, controls respond, but the flight is running on code. You feel like the pilot, but you're riding a system already in motion. Some scientists propose a softer view. Maybe free will is not absolute freedom, but flexible control. The brain runs automatic processes, but higher-level systems can shape them. You can't stop a feeling from rising, but you can decide how to respond. You can't change your genetics, but you can reflect, pause, and steer behavior over time. This kind of free will is not magical. It's built from feedback loops and awareness. You still don't fully control what you think, but you can influence how you act on those thoughts. But even this view faces problems. If your higher-level reasoning is itself the product of your biology and experience, then its outputs are determined too. You reflect because you were taught to reflect. You pause because your neurons are wired to pause. The freedom seems to shrink the more you look at it. Each layer is built on the one before. Now ask what happens to guilt or pride in this model. If you succeed, is it your doing, or just a lucky mix of traits and circumstances? If you fail, is it your fault, or the outcome of forces beyond your reach? The brain wants to assign credit and blame. That helps with learning and cooperation. But if free will is an illusion, those assignments are based on a misunderstanding. They rest on the idea that the person could have acted differently. But maybe they couldn't. The backfire is complete. You ask whether free will exists. You dig deeper. You analyze the brain. You find mechanisms, not magic. You discover that most of what you do happens before you know why. You hope for clarity, but what you get is a sense that the self is smaller than it seemed. The chooser was chosen. The thinker is thought. The decider rides decisions already forming in the dark. You still live your life. You still weigh options. You still face choices. But now you wonder if those choices are just moments where the brain updates its path, like a GPS rerouting after traffic. It feels like you decided, but maybe you're just watching the update happen. Maybe you're the audience, not the author. Or maybe you're both, a system that observes itself and calls it freedom. Everything that happens seems to have a cause. A tree falls because of strong wind. A glass breaks because someone dropped it. You get hungry because your body needs fuel. The pattern feels universal. If something happens, something else made it happen. That's how we understand the world, through cause and effect. But then the question comes, what caused the very first thing? That's the first cause paradox. If every event is caused by something before it, then you can keep asking, what caused that forever? You follow the chain of causes backward. The war was caused by political tension, caused by economic collapse, caused by resource shortages, caused by environmental shifts, caused by cosmic events, caused by the Big Bang. Then you stop. What caused the Big Bang? If you say nothing, you break the rule. The rule says every event must have a cause. If the Big Bang had no cause, it's an exception. If it did have a cause, then what caused that cause? And so on. The chain stretches backward with no clear starting point. That's the paradox. If the rule holds, then there must be an earlier cause. But if the chain is infinite, there's no first cause. And if the chain stops, then something must have caused the first cause, or else the rule is broken. Some people respond with the idea of an uncaused cause. This is something that starts everything else, but is not itself started by anything. Philosophers like Aristotle called this the prime mover. Religious thinkers later called it God. In this view, there is one necessary being or force that exists outside of time and space, and it kicks off the entire universe. But this raises another problem. If everything needs a cause, then why doesn't this uncaused cause need one? Why does the chain of causality apply to everything except this one's starting point? The rule gets broken to save the rule. That feels like a cheat. You say everything must have a cause except for this one thing. But why is that thing special? Why not apply the same exception to the universe itself? Maybe the universe doesn't need a cause. Maybe it just is. That's where some physicists take the question. They suggest that maybe the universe can come from nothing. But here the word nothing becomes slippery. In science, nothing often means a quantum vacuum, a state with no matter, but with energy, fluctuations, and laws. That's not truly nothing, it's a kind of something. If the universe came from that, then the question becomes, what caused the vacuum? What made the laws? You're back to asking what came before. Some theories suggest time itself began with the Big Bang. If that's true, then asking what came before may be meaningless. If there was no before, then there was no time for anything to happen. The universe didn't emerge in time, it brought time with it. So maybe there is no cause because there is no earlier moment. But this answer doesn't solve the paradox. It avoids it by changing the language. It says, there was no cause because the question doesn't make sense. But our minds still want to ask. We want a cause, even if time wasn't there to hold it. Others suggest the universe has no beginning at all. Maybe the chain of causes is infinite. No first event, no starting point, just an endless series of things causing other things. This removes the need for a first cause. But infinity has its own problems. If there's no beginning, how did we ever arrive at now? Imagine a staircase stretching infinitely into the past. You start climbing, you climb forever. When do you reach today? If the past never started, how did the present arrive? It feels like you'd be stuck in the process, never arriving. Another idea comes from modern cosmology. Some theories propose that our universe is one of many. In these multiverse theories, universes appear, expand, and vanish like bubbles in a vast foam. If so, maybe our universe was caused by another universe, that universe by another, and so on. But then you ask, what caused the multiverse? The pattern repeats. You can keep pushing the cause back, but the paradox follows. Now take a step back. The idea that everything must have a cause is a principle drawn from our experience. We see events happen in time. One thing follows another. But maybe that principle only works inside the universe. Maybe causality is a local rule, not a universal law. Outside our space and time, it may not apply, but we don't know what that even means. We've never experienced anything outside of space and time. We can't test it. We can only imagine. This shows the deeper issue. The paradox may not lie in the world itself, but in our thinking. Our minds are built to see cause and effect. It helps us survive. We learn that fire burns, that food spoils, that people react to what we do. But when we ask about the beginning of everything, we stretch that habit to its breaking point. We demand a cause, even when one may not be possible or meaningful. Our tools of thought are too limited for the scale of the question. So we face a choice. Either accept an uncaused first cause or accept an infinite regress. Either way, the rule that everything must have a cause breaks down. You either find a special exception or accept a loop with no start. Both options leave you unsettled, but both might be the best we can do. The first cause paradox doesn't give you answers. It gives you boundaries. It shows where reasoning hits its edge. You ask, what caused the first event? And every answer opens more questions. You look for the beginning of the story, but the book has no first page. Or if it does, it's a blank one. And yet, the story continues. You set up an experiment. You fire a single particle, like a photon, toward a screen with two slits. If you don't observe which slit the photon goes through, it creates an interference pattern. That pattern means the photon acts like a wave. It goes through both slits at once and interferes with itself. But if you place a detector to find out which slit the photon passed through, the pattern disappears. The photon acts like a particle. It goes through one slit or the other. The act of measuring changes the outcome. This is called the double slit experiment. It's been repeated for decades. It shows that particles behave differently when observed. Observation decides whether the particle acts like a wave or like a solid object. That's already strange. But things get stranger when you add a delay. Now imagine you fire the photon through the slits and let it move toward a detector screen. But instead of checking which slit it passed through right away, you delay that decision. You let the photon travel past the slits. Then, after it has already gone through, you decide whether to measure which path it took. If you choose to measure, the interference pattern disappears. If you choose not to measure, the pattern appears. This is the quantum eraser setup. You make a decision after the particle has passed through the slits, yet your decision seems to affect whether it behaved like a wave or a particle before you chose. The past appears to change depending on what you do in the present. That's the retroactive choice paradox. It says your later decision influences what the particle did earlier, not what it appears to do, not just your knowledge of it, what it actually did. This idea turns cause and effect on its head. Normally, we think events move forward. You drop a glass, and it breaks. You don't say, it broke, so I must have dropped it. But in this experiment, it feels like the final act, the decision to measure, reaches back and reshapes the earlier behavior of the particle. If you don't ask which slit it went through, it behaves like a wave. If you do ask, it behaves like a particle. And the behavior appears to be baked into the particle's path from the beginning, even though your decision comes later. To be clear, this isn't a matter of getting delayed information. You aren't simply discovering what happened, you're changing what happened. The experiment is set up so that the photon's detection pattern only makes sense if the earlier event changed, and that earlier event was already finished, according to our normal understanding of time. This forces us to rethink what happened even means. In classical physics, the world is made of objects moving along definite paths. You can predict where things go. You can trace events back to their cause. But quantum physics doesn't work like that. In quantum systems, events are described by probabilities until they're observed. The wave function holds all the possible paths. Once you measure, the wave function collapses. One path becomes real, the others vanish. But the quantum eraser suggests that this collapse isn't fixed in time. You can delay the measurement and still influence the outcome. Your observation doesn't just freeze a result, it chooses the history. This sounds impossible, but it's not a fringe claim. It's built into the math of quantum mechanics. And the delayed choice quantum eraser experiments have been done many times. The results hold. Here's one way it's done. You fire entangled photons. One goes toward a detector that will show an interference pattern or not, depending on whether you know which slit it passed through. The other photon travels to a different part of the setup, where a choice is made. Measure which path it took, or erase that path information. This choice is made randomly, and after the first photon has already hit the screen. When you compare the two photons' data later, you find that your delayed decision on the second photon seems to decide whether the first photon showed a wave or particle behavior. It's like writing a book and letting someone else decide later whether your character was brave or cowardly. And somehow, their future decision rewrites the pages you already published. Some physicists try to explain this using a kind of logic that isn't bound by classical time. They say the events are entangled. not just in space, but across time. Others suggest that the particle never really did anything until all measurements are considered together. In this view, the full story only becomes real when the whole setup is done. The timeline isn't a sequence, it's a web. Your future measurement helps shape that web retroactively. But this still breaks our normal sense of how time works. We think the past is fixed. We think decisions can't travel backward. But in quantum experiments, that boundary dissolves. The outcome isn't locked in when the event happens. It's locked in when the full measurement context is complete. The paradox doesn't mean you can send messages to the past. You can't change what already happened in your own timeline. The change only shows up in the correlation between entangled particles. If you don't compare the data, no retroactive effect is visible. That keeps causality safe, sort of. But philosophically, the idea is unsettling. It says that reality doesn't settle down into facts until a decision is made, sometimes a decision made later. You don't just observe a fact, you help create it, and that creation can stretch backward in time. Some physicists call this participatory realism. The idea is that the observer is not just a passive reader of the universe. The observer is part of the story. You can't separate the particle from the measurement. You can't separate the past from the way it's examined. That leaves us in a strange position. We live our lives in a world where cause leads to effect. We believe that choices shape the future. But in the quantum world, choices seem to echo backward. A future decision finalizes an earlier state. What you choose to know reshapes what was. That's the retroactive choice paradox. It doesn't break the laws of physics. It comes straight from them. But it breaks our sense of time, choice, and history. It says that the world doesn't fully exist until you engage with it, and that engagement can ripple into the past, changing what was true before you even asked. You check your calendar. A deadline is coming. A birthday passed. You schedule meetings, count days, and feel time move forward. You say things like last week, next year, and in 10 minutes. Time feels like a river, flowing in one direction, pulling you from past to future. But the river is shaped by the tools we use to track it. Days, hours, minutes, these are not part of nature. They're inventions. Human-made structures imposed on the world to make sense of change. That's the calendar illusion. Time feels solid and linear because we built a framework that makes it feel that way. But the frame is not the thing. Start with the basics. A second is defined as a vibration count in a cesium atom, 9,192,031,770 ticks, to be exact. It wasn't always that precise. In the past, people used sun shadows, sand timers, dripping water, and candles to track passing moments. The second didn't exist in nature. It was carved out of movement and repetition. Same with the hour, the day, the week. These are not natural divisions, they are agreements. They organize life but do not reflect a universal truth. The Earth rotates, that's real. But the choice to divide one spin into 24 hours is cultural. The day is tied to one full rotation of the Earth. That's a natural cycle. The year is tied to the Earth's orbit around the sun, another natural cycle. But everything in between, weeks, hours, minutes, seconds, was imposed to manage life. They're tools. The 7-day week has religious origins, not astronomical ones. Different cultures had different systems. The Romans once used an 8-day week. Ancient Egypt used a 10-day week. The 7-day cycle spread with empires and religions. It's now standard, but it's not inevitable. This creates a strange effect. The calendar becomes invisible. We live by it so deeply that we stop seeing it. We forget that it's not part of nature. We act like Monday is different from Tuesday because the world changes, when really, it's the same Earth, spinning in the same way. The feeling that Monday is hard or Friday is exciting comes from the schedule we built, not from the sky. Now look at the months. 30 days hath September. But why? Months don't divide evenly into the year. The moon takes about 29.5 days to cycle through its phases. So lunar calendars tried to follow that rhythm. But 12 lunar months add up to about 354 days, not 365. So lunar calendars drift over time. Solar calendars follow the sun's path, but they ignore the moon. The Gregorian calendar we use now was a fix. It patched up earlier systems with leap years and month lengths that wobble from 28 to 31 days. It works well enough, but it's messy. It's a compromise. And like the rest of the calendar, it's a tool, not a fact. This matters more than it seems. The calendar shapes how we feel time. It creates the illusion that time is neat and segmented. You flip a page and believe you've moved from one unit to another. You say, "That happened in June," as if June is a container. But June is just a name. It doesn't exist outside the calendar. What happened, happened. The date is a label. Even the idea of time zones is an invention. Noon used to mean when the sun is highest, and it was different for every town. Then trains came. Schedules needed to line up, so people created time zones. Now noon can mean 12 by the clock, even when the sun is not overhead. Again, the system helps us live together, but it changes how we see time. This illusion shows up in daily life. You feel rushed because the clock says 9:02 and your meeting starts at 9. But nothing real changed in those 2 minutes. The pressure comes from the system, not the moment. You feel guilty for wasting time, but the waste is measured by hours, not by any loss in the world itself. A quiet moment staring at trees might be called unproductive, even though it changed your state of mind. The illusion deepens with schedules. You say, "I don't have time," when your time is full of slots you filled. You believe the structure is real and your life must fit into it. But the structure is optional. You can delete a meeting, you can choose not to check the clock, you can stop measuring, but it feels like you can't because the structure feels solid. Now zoom out. Time feels linear, past, present, future, one line, always forward. But that's not how physics sees it. In Einstein's theory of relativity, time is flexible. It can stretch and compress depending on speed and gravity. Two people moving at different speeds can measure time differently. Their clocks tick at different rates. Even simultaneity, two things happening at the same time, is not absolute. It depends on your frame of reference. This matters more than it seems. The calendar shapes how we feel time. It creates the illusion that time is neat and segmented. You flip a page and believe you've moved from one unit to another. You say, "That happened in June," as if June is a container. But June is just a name. It doesn't exist outside the calendar. What happened, happened. The date is a label. Even the idea of time zones is an invention. Noon used to mean when the sun is highest, and it was different for every town. Then trains came. Schedules needed to line up, so people created time zones. Now noon can mean 12 by the clock, even when the sun is not overhead. Again, the system helps us live together, but it changes how we see time. This illusion shows up in daily life. You feel rushed because the clock says 9:02 and your meeting starts at 9. But nothing real changed in those 2 minutes. The pressure comes from the system, not the moment. You feel guilty for wasting time, but the waste is measured by hours, not by any loss in the world itself. A quiet moment staring at trees might be called unproductive, even though it changed your state of mind. The illusion deepens with schedules. You say, "I don't have time," when your time is full of slots you filled. You believe the structure is real and your life must fit into it. But the structure is optional. You can delete a meeting. You can choose not to check the clock. You can stop measuring, but it feels like you can't because the structure feels solid. Now zoom out. Time feels linear, past, present, future. One line, always forward. But that's not how physics sees it. In Einstein's theory of relativity, time is flexible. It can stretch and compress depending on speed and gravity. Two people moving at different speeds can measure time differently. Their clocks tick at different rates. Even simultaneity, two things happening at the same time, is not absolute. It depends on your frame of reference. In deep space, far from Earth, there is no now that applies to everything. The past and future are not fixed points. They depend on where you are and how you move. This makes our calendar feel even more artificial. It slices time into neat packages, but the universe doesn't care. The universe doesn't say it's 4:30 on a Tuesday. That's our map. It helps us navigate, but it's not the territory. The paradox becomes clear when you try to imagine time without a calendar. You still age, the sun still rises and sets, things still happen. But how do you track them? You'd have no weeks, no months, no years. You'd live in rhythms, not numbers. You'd measure time by light and shadow, by hunger, by sleep. You'd say the sun is high, or the moon is thin, or the air feels colder. This is how people lived for thousands of years. Their time was cyclical, seasonal, embedded in nature, not linear, not boxed. That old sense of time still lingers. You feel it on long walks, on vacations, in music, in grief. When someone dies, the calendar tells you the date, but the loss unfolds on its own schedule. A year passes and you still feel it, or maybe you don't. The date arrives and you feel nothing. The calendar moves forward, your heart moves in circles. The calendar illusion makes us forget that. It tells us time is regular, objective, universal. But our experience of time is not like that. Time feels fast when you're late, slow when you're bored, gone when you're in flow. It loops in dreams, it stretches in childhood, it shrinks in age. The second hand doesn't reflect any of that. It just ticks. You live inside a structure built by others. You inherit the hours, the months, the deadlines. You learn to think of them as real, but they are tools. And like all tools, they shape the user. They help you plan, but they also shape how you feel time passing. They make it linear, numerical, and scarce. That's the illusion. Not that time isn't real, but that time as you live it is built from pieces that don't exist in nature. You think in boxes, but you move in rhythms. You think in minutes, but you feel in moments. You watch the calendar turn and say another year gone. But the year didn't go anywhere, only your idea of it did. You leave your house. You know how long the trip should take, maybe 30 minutes. You check the clock. You walk or drive, look out the window, wait at lights, stop at signs. Time feels slow. You think, this is taking forever. You finally arrive and check the time again. It's been about 30 minutes. Later, you head home along the exact same path. You don't feel rushed. You're tired, maybe distracted. Then you arrive and think, that was faster. You check the clock again, same 30 minutes. So why did it feel quicker? This is the asymmetric time feel. The trip there feels longer than the trip back, even when both take the same amount of time. The effect is common. Most people notice it at some point, especially when they travel somewhere new. The return trip feels shorter, more familiar, less frustrating. It's a mental shift, not a physical one. Psychologists and neuroscientists have studied this. It's not caused by actual time differences. It's caused by how the brain processes expectation, attention, and memory. When you first go somewhere, especially if it's unfamiliar, you pay close attention. You look for landmarks, you check signs, you estimate distance. Your brain is more alert, more focused on time passing. The more attention you pay, the longer time feels. You're aware of each segment, you're tracking progress, and that awareness stretches time in your perception. On the way back, things change. You recognize buildings and turns. You know what to expect. Your brain relaxes. It doesn't process every detail with the same intensity. You already know how long the trip is. You stop checking the time so often. Your mental map is more complete. And because you notice fewer moments, your brain compresses the experience. Less attention leads to shorter perceived time. The paradox deepens with routine. The first day of a new job feels long. You're absorbing everything: names, spaces, tasks. But by the third week, time moves faster. The days blend. You drive to work and forget parts of the trip. You leave and arrive with fewer memories in between. The brain edits the journey. That editing shapes how long the experience feels. Another piece of the puzzle is expectation. When you head to a new place, you often expect it to be quick. You underestimate the time. You might think, this should only take 20 minutes, and then it takes 30. That mismatch creates drag. You feel delayed. The clock doesn't match your expectation, so time feels longer. On the way back, your estimate is more accurate. You expect 30 minutes, and that's what happens. The match feels smoother. The brain registers less friction. The time feels right, or even short. This also explains why the effect often disappears on the second round trip. If you travel somewhere and back for the first time, the way there feels long. The way back feels short. But if you do it again the next day, both directions feel more even. The novelty has worn off. Your brain is now familiar with both paths. The asymmetry fades. Researchers have tested this with participants who took round trips of equal duration. In one study, people watched videos of a cyclist riding along a path, then returning. They judged the return trip as shorter, even though it was exactly the same length. The effect held even when participants knew both trips were equal. Knowing didn't fix the feeling. The feeling came from how their minds processed the journey, not what the stopwatch said. Another factor is how we chunk memory. The brain stores time through events. If more things happen, time feels longer. The trip to a new place usually includes more moments, noticing turns, wondering about timing, making small corrections. Those become memory markers. On the way back, there are fewer surprises. The moments blend together. Less memory storage means a shorter feeling experience. This also explains why time feels long when you're bored or anxious. Waiting for a bus that's late feels endless. Each second is loud. You keep checking your watch. Your mind breaks the wait into many small, painful moments. But if you're busy, the same span disappears. The brain doesn't record as much. It stores time by change. No change, no memory. No memory, short time. The asymmetric time feel shows up in other ways. A flight to a new country feels long. The return flight feels quicker. A walk to a new friend's house drags on. The walk home feels brief, even with tired feet. The effect isn't just tied to excitement or boredom. It's about attention density. The brain stretches or shrinks time based on how much it notices. Technology can blur this. Using a map app means you're not building a mental map. You're following step by step. That reduces surprise. It can shorten perceived time on the way there and back because you're offloading attention. But it also makes the trip feel flatter, less vivid. When you remember it later, you might remember the destination but not the journey. Even memory plays a trick. You look back on a vacation. The first day feels long in memory. So much happened, new sights, new smells, but by day 5, things speed up. The trip feels like it flew by. This is the same paradox in a wider form. The more novelty, the longer time feels in the moment and in recall. When your days become predictable, your brain records less. Time collapses. But in the moment, this is why going somewhere feels longer than returning. Your brain is on alert. You're tracking progress. You're absorbing new information. You notice more. The clock stays the same. But your experience stretches. On the way back, you relax. You know the road. You stop measuring. Your brain does less work. Time shrinks. This isn't just a curiosity. It shapes how we live. It affects how we remember events, how we plan trips, how we judge experiences. It means our internal sense of time is elastic. It bends based on attention, emotion, memory, and familiarity. The asymmetric time feel reminds us that what we call time is not just minutes ticking away. It's what the mind does with those minutes. And the mind doesn't keep perfect time. It keeps meaningful time. You enter a room full of strangers. Before stepping in, you think, "No one here will like me." That belief shapes your body. You tense up. You avoid eye contact. You speak less. When someone smiles at you, you look away. When they try to make small talk, you give short replies. After a while, people stop trying. You leave the room thinking, "I was right, they didn't like me." That's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Your belief created the behavior that brought about the outcome you feared. But it feels like the outcome proves the belief. You walk away more certain than ever that people dislike you, even though your own behavior played a central role in making that happen. This creates a loop. Belief changes behavior. Behavior changes outcome. Outcome reinforces belief. You can't tell anymore whether the belief was true from the beginning or if it became true because you acted on it. You believe, you behave, and the belief becomes real, at least to you. Take another case. A teacher thinks a student is lazy. Because of that belief, the teacher gives the student less attention. The teacher expects poor work, so they don't push the student or offer encouragement. The student picks up on the teacher's attitude and starts to disengage. They turn in sloppy assignments, not because they're lazy, but because they've been given up on. The teacher sees this as confirmation. "See? I knew it." The belief caused the behavior, but the behavior now looks like evidence. This is the self-fulfilling prophecy loop. It doesn't only live in classrooms. It shows up in economics, politics, psychology, relationships, even medicine. A patient who believes a drug will help may improve, even if the pill is a placebo. The belief triggers chemical responses that create actual relief. The body listens to the mind. The effect works in finance too. If enough people believe a bank is going to fail, they withdraw their money. That rush causes the bank to collapse. The fear was the cause, not the result. But in hindsight, the collapse looks like proof the fear was justified. It wasn't. It was causal. In each of these cases, the belief is not neutral, it's active. It shapes the system it describes. This blurs the line between cause and effect. Did the event happen because it was always going to, or because people expected it? Now shift back to individual experience. Suppose you believe you're not good enough to get a promotion. You don't speak up in meetings. You take fewer risks. You avoid applying. Your manager sees you as less engaged. When the promotion goes to someone else, you feel confirmed. But it wasn't a matter of being unqualified. It was the quiet withdrawal that tilted the result. This is where the loop tightens. The mind starts to say, I was right, but the proof is tainted. The belief shaped the conditions. The belief made itself true. You don't see that, though. You see a result and assume it confirms a fact. The loop becomes invisible. It feels like reality. The danger is that beliefs seem passive, but they're not. Every belief holds an instruction. Don't try, stay quiet, expect rejection, or in positive cases, keep going, you can do this. These hidden commands turn thoughts into habits. Habits become action. Action reshapes the world. People often say, thoughts are powerful. This is what they mean. A belief is not just an idea, it's a lens. It changes what you notice, how you act, how others respond, and what you remember. Over time, it carves a path. If you believe you're always unlucky, you'll start to see only your failures. If you believe people can't be trusted, you'll treat them with distance, and they'll withdraw. That confirms the belief, and the cycle grows. Even expectations of failure can create failure. Athletes sometimes lose not because they're weaker, but because they expect to lose. Their nerves change their posture, their speed, their rhythm. A small slip confirms the fear. They lose focus. The fear wins, not the opponent. But here's where the paradox deepens. Sometimes the belief comes after the fact. You get rejected. You feel unworthy. You build a belief, I'm not lovable. Then next time, you enter a relationship with fear. That fear leads to clinginess or coldness. The relationship fails. The belief gets stronger. But it didn't start as a belief. It started as a single bad experience. Now it's running your life. So which came first, the belief or the outcome? You can't always tell. Sometimes the belief grows from past facts, but then it starts shaping future ones. It becomes less about what was and more about what will be. That's the loop. Once the belief has taken root, it doesn't just describe reality, it builds it. This is not wishful thinking. It doesn't mean believing you'll win the lottery makes you rich. Belief doesn't override probability. But in areas where behavior influences results, social life, performance, learning, leadership, belief is a tool or a trap. That's why people emphasize mindset, not as magic, but as leverage. A confident person enters a room with ease. That ease puts others at ease. The interaction goes well. Confidence rises, the cycle feeds itself. Same with pessimism, same with hope. The feedback loop is real. This doesn't mean beliefs are always wrong. Some reflect real patterns, but even accurate beliefs need scrutiny if they shape outcomes. A person who's failed in love may believe they're bad at relationships. That may be partially true, but the belief can make things worse. It turns hesitation into self-sabotage. The loop also works at group levels. If a society believes a group is less capable, it may give them fewer resources or lower expectations. That creates underperformance, which confirms the bias. The group looks less capable, not because they are, but because they were treated that way. Beliefs shape structures. Structures shape behavior. Behavior then proves the belief. This is why the self-fulfilling prophecy is hard to escape. It's self-justifying. You believe, you act, you see results. You say, see, but you forget your belief started the chain. The loop ends only when someone breaks it. That might mean acting against the belief. Speaking up even when you feel invisible. Applying even when you expect rejection. Offering trust even when you fear betrayal. That's not easy, but it's the only way to test the belief, to see if it holds when your behavior changes. That test doesn't always lead to success, but it breaks the automatic pattern. It gives new outcomes a chance to appear. It creates space for a new belief and a new loop. You flip a switch on a quantum experiment. The detector is set, the setup is ready, a photon is released. It travels. It passes through a device that splits its path. It might go left, it might go right, it hits a screen. The pattern it makes depends on whether you know which path it took. But here's the strange part. You choose how to measure after the photon has passed the path splitting point. Your later decision determines whether the photon took one path or behaved like it took both. That means your future action seems to shape what happened earlier. This is the future causes past paradox. It shows up in certain interpretations of quantum mechanics. These interpretations don't break the math. The equations remain unchanged, but they offer different ways to explain what the math says. And some of those ways suggest that time doesn't work the way we think. In the classical world, causes always come before effects. If you break a glass, you know you dropped it first. You never see the glass shatter, then fall. But in the quantum world, that sequence isn't always so clear. One version of this paradox appears in the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment. It builds on the famous double slit experiment. In the double slit version, particles like photons create an interference pattern when not measured, showing wave-like behavior. But when you measure which slit they go through, the pattern disappears. They act like particles instead. The act of measurement changes the result. The delayed choice version takes it further. It splits each photon into two entangled parts. One part goes to the detector screen, the other part goes to a separate detector that reveals or hides which path information. Crucially, the decision to reveal or erase that information is made after the first photon has already hit the screen. But when scientists later look at the results, they find that the earlier measurement, the pattern or no pattern, matches the later choice. It's as if the future choice rewrote the past. This doesn't mean time travel. You can't send messages to the past. You can't change history on demand. What it means is that quantum events don't fully lock in until the whole setup, including future parts, is complete. The experiment doesn't just depend on the starting conditions. It depends on the final configuration, too. It's like reading a mystery novel where the ending changes the meaning of earlier scenes. Except in this case, the scenes were filmed before the ending was written. This idea shows up in the transactional interpretation of quantum mechanics. That interpretation treats quantum events as a kind of handshake across time. A particle sends out an offer wave forward in time. A detector sends back a confirmation wave backward in time. When those waves connect, the transaction is complete. The interaction forms a link across time, both forward and backward. The event becomes real only when both ends agree. The equations used in quantum physics support this. They're time-symmetric. That means they don't care whether time moves forward or backward. The math works either way. The Schrödinger equation, which describes how quantum systems evolve, is fully reversible. But our daily experience is not. We feel time move in one direction. We remember the past and anticipate the future. We don't wake up knowing what happened tomorrow, but the equations say nothing about that. Time's direction doesn't come from the math. It comes from something else, like thermodynamics or consciousness or the limits of measurement. If quantum events allow backward in time effects, then cause and effect blur. You choose a measurement. That choice shapes the outcome. But the outcome includes events that already happened. The past isn't frozen, it's flexible, until observed. This turns the usual timeline upside down. The future doesn't just follow from the past, it helps define it. Imagine flipping a coin. In classical physics, the coin lands on heads or tails based on how you flip it, the air, and where it hits the ground. The result follows from the cause. But in quantum mechanics, the coin is in a superposition of heads and tails until you look. And if your later choice of how to look changes the kind of coin it was, then the coin's state was not fully set until after the flip. That's what the future causes past paradox suggests. Some physicists avoid this idea. They say the paradox vanishes if you interpret quantum mechanics differently. In the Copenhagen interpretation, the act of measurement collapses the wave function. No need to say anything about the future changing the past. In the many worlds interpretation, all outcomes happen in parallel universes. Your choice just decides which branch you're on. Again, no retrocausality needed. But these interpretations raise their own questions. The Copenhagen view doesn't explain how or why collapse happens. The many worlds view demands a vast number of parallel outcomes, all real but unreachable. So some scientists prefer a view that keeps time symmetric. They say maybe the past is just as uncertain as the future, and only becomes real when events close the loop. This perspective finds echoes in other areas. In thermodynamics, we think of entropy increasing, disorder spreading, as the arrow of time. But entropy increase is a statistical trend, not a fixed rule. It's not impossible for entropy to decrease, it's just very unlikely. That suggests that time's direction is not absolute. It's emergent. It comes from how things usually happen, not from how they must. In relativity, time is part of space-time. It's not a flow, it's a dimension. Events don't unfold in a stream, they exist in a structure. Your present is someone else's past. Your future is someone else's now. All moments exist together, like scenes in a film strip. You move through them, but they don't move. From that view, past and future are not different in kind. They're just differently located. If you combine relativity with quantum mechanics, the future causes past paradox becomes harder to ignore. Quantum systems seem to be sensitive not just to where and how they're observed, but when. A complete description must include the full context. And that context might include events in the future. That's a hard idea to accept. We're used to thinking of the past as fixed. We believe the past happened, and nothing can change it. The future is open. The present is where we act. But in quantum mechanics, the present seems to carry more weight. It mediates between what might happen and what did happen. Observation closes the loop. This doesn't give you control over the past. You can't rewrite history by making choices now, but it might mean the past was never fully real until the present arrived. Reality forms when all parts of the setup, before and after, come into alignment. The photon didn't choose a path until you chose how to. Your later choice filled in the earlier blank. In that way, the paradox doesn't just challenge physics, it challenges our idea of time. It says the past isn't behind you, settled and safe. It might still depend on what happens next. And the future might not just unfold from the past. It might reach back, whisper into earlier moments, and shape the story as it's being told. You sit down to learn something new. Maybe it's a concept in science, a word in another language, or a philosophical idea. But then a question arises. How do you even begin? If you already know what you're looking for, then you don't need to look. If you don't know what it is, then how will you recognize it when you find it? This is the paradox of inquiry, also known as Meno's paradox, from a dialogue by Plato. The idea is simple but powerful. You can't search for what you know, you already have it. You can't search for what you don't know because you don't know what to look for. So how is learning even possible? Imagine a detective looking for a suspect. If the detective already knows who the person is, there's no real investigation. They just go get them. But if the detective has no clue what the suspect looks like, no name, no traits, not even a hint, then how could they ever narrow it down? They could see the suspect and walk right past without knowing. That's the paradox. It applies to every kind of learning. Say you want to understand justice. If you already know what justice is, there's no need to ask questions. If you don't know, how do you know where to start? How do you know what counts as a good answer or a bad one? We think of learning as a search for truth, but a search implies some direction. You walk through a forest looking for a cabin. If you have a map or know a landmark, you'll get there. But what if you don't know what a cabin looks like? You could walk past it and assume it's a shed. Or you might sit still because you have no idea which way to go. Meno's paradox says this is the problem with all inquiry. It raises doubt about whether true learning is possible at all. The challenge comes down to recognition. Suppose someone tells you, go find virtue. If you already know what virtue is, you can look for examples. If you don't, anything you find might be wrong. How would you tell? If you don't know what justice, beauty, courage, or love really are, then how do you tell when you found them? Even in practical cases, this appears. You go to look for a type of mushroom. If you know it well, you can spot it. If you've never seen it before and someone says, find the chanterelle, you have to guess based on vague traits. You could pick the wrong one. You might walk past the right one. The only reason you succeed is because you match what you see to something you already carry in your head. But where did that idea come from? Plato's answer to the paradox is a theory called recollection. He says that the soul already knows all things from a time before birth. Learning, then, is not discovering something new. It's remembering what you already know deep down. The teacher helps draw it out. In Plato's dialogue, Socrates uses questions to help a slave boy figure out a geometry problem, even though the boy has never been taught math. Plato uses this to argue that the boy is not learning from scratch. He is uncovering knowledge he already had inside. This solves the paradox by saying the mind already contains the truth. Inquiry works because it's a kind of remembering, not a fresh discovery. But that answer isn't satisfying for everyone. Not everyone believes in a soul or past lives, so the problem remains. A modern answer looks at the way humans learn by trial and error. We don't search in a blind vacuum. Even if we don't know what something is, we often have partial knowledge or an idea of what it isn't. This allows us to test possibilities. You may not know the exact meaning of a foreign word, but if you see it in context, you can make a guess. You eliminate wrong answers. You refine your idea. Slowly, you build knowledge. In this view, learning is iterative. It doesn't require full knowledge up front. It only needs a small piece of direction, a fragment, an analogy, a clue. You don't need to know the whole truth to begin inquiry. You just need enough to recognize when something seems closer or farther from what you're trying to understand. Another way around the paradox is to say that learning doesn't require certainty. It requires a framework. Scientists often work with models. They build a rough version of how something works, test it, then revise it. They may not know the full nature of gravity, but they can ask questions and measure results. The questions don't depend on having the full answer. They depend on being willing to guess, observe, and update. Language learners do something similar. You might not know the rules of grammar, but by listening and imitating, you get a feel for what sounds right. Over time, you build up a sense of the language. You never knew the rules in advance. You didn't know what you were looking for, but you made progress anyway. So the paradox may only apply if we think of learning as all or nothing. If knowledge must be perfect before it's useful, then yes, inquiry seems impossible. But if knowledge is something you build gradually, then you can begin with half-formed questions and move toward clearer understanding. You don't need to know everything about music to learn to play. You don't need to understand justice fully to start asking about it. You begin with what you have and use it to find more. Even when you don't know something, you often know enough to ask a better question. A child asks, "Why is the sky blue?" They don't expect a physics lesson. They're trying to fit what they see into what they already believe. The answer helps reshape that belief. The child might then ask, "Why does light scatter?" Each question opens space for the next. Inquiry becomes possible not because you already know the answer, but because you're willing to test what you think you know against the world. This is what keeps philosophy alive. You don't need full knowledge of truth to search for it. You start with uncertainty. You hold your assumptions up to the light. You test, revise, and question again. Meno's paradox shows that knowledge is not simple. You can't chase it like a dog chases a ball. But you also don't need to sit still. You can begin with doubt. You can ask questions. Listen for tension and notice what does or doesn't make sense. You might not recognize the answer right away. You might not even be sure what counts as an answer, but that's part of the process. Inquiry isn't about knowing exactly what to look for. It's about learning to see what you didn't expect. It's about starting with a partial map and filling it in, even when you're unsure where it leads. You want to create something new. Maybe you're a writer trying to invent a fresh story, or a musician looking for a sound no one's heard before. You sit down with a blank page or an empty score, ready to make something original. But the moment you begin, you feel the weight of everything that came before. Every idea feels familiar. Every phrase echoes something you've already read or heard. You try to avoid copying, but how do you escape what you've already absorbed? This is the paradox of originality. To be original, you have to break from the past. But to break from the past, you first have to study it. You need to know what's already been done so you can avoid repeating it. That means learning the very patterns you're trying to resist. You must internalize the rules before you can bend or reject them. But in doing so, those rules shape you. Think of a painter. If they want to develop a unique style, they must first study existing styles, classical, Baroque, Impressionist, abstract. They need to understand how others used color, form, and space. Without that knowledge, their work floats in a vacuum. But the more they study, the more those styles influence them. Even their resistance becomes a response to what they've learned. If they say, "I want to paint nothing like Picasso," then Picasso is still part of the equation. Originality then becomes a conversation with history, not an escape from it. But that conversation has rules. You can't reject something you don't understand. A jazz musician who avoids traditional harmony without knowing what harmony is won't sound innovative. They'll sound lost. A poet who avoids rhyme without knowing the role rhyme played in meter and structure won't sound deliberate. They'll sound unfinished. To make a meaningful break, you have to first learn the system. The paradox appears when that system becomes too comfortable. You learn from the past to build your skills. You imitate to understand technique. You absorb rhythms, shapes, words, and tones. Over time, your mind becomes patterned. You start to think like those who came before. You solve problems the way they did. That makes it hard to step outside. You try to be original, but your thoughts keep looping back to what you already know. Your education becomes both your foundation and your boundary. Now think about invention. Suppose you want to create a new type of chair. You study all kinds of chairs: rocking chairs, folding chairs, office chairs, stools. You learn what makes them work: balance, comfort, support. Then you try to design something truly new, but everything you draw resembles something else. Your imagination is shaped by what chairs have always been. You're not just building a new object. You're struggling against the very idea of chair that you now carry in your head. The more you've learned, the more you know what not to do, but also the more you've narrowed what you think is possible. This shows up in science too. To propose a new theory, you have to first master the old ones. You need to understand classical mechanics before you can challenge it with relativity. You need to study biology before you can propose a new model of evolution. But by the time you've mastered the old ideas, they've shaped how you think. Your mind becomes trained to defend them. It takes effort to break through that training. The skills that made you competent now resist the leap to something new. Even language works this way. You learn to speak by mimicking others. You learn phrases, metaphors, and idioms. Over time, those patterns become automatic. They help you express ideas, but they also limit you. If you say, "time flies," or "break the ice," or "think outside the box," you're using inherited language. It feels natural, but it's not original. To say something new, you must break from those habits. But to break them, you must first recognize them. And to recognize them, you must have already used them. So where does originality come from? It doesn't come from isolation. A person who avoids all influence doesn't create something pure. They create something shallow. Without history, there is no context. Without learning, there is no depth. Originality doesn't mean creating from nothing. It means transforming what you've inherited into something else. This is why so many original thinkers began with imitation. Shakespeare borrowed plots. Picasso studied classical drawing. Einstein read Newton. They didn't invent from scratch. They absorbed the past, then reassembled it in ways no one had seen before. Their work was original, not because it avoided influence, but because it reshaped it. The paradox sharpens when originality becomes a goal. If you aim to be original for its own sake, you risk chasing novelty without substance. You reject ideas just because they've been done before. You avoid familiar forms, even if they still hold value. That can lead to confusion. You end up making something that no one understands, not because it's new, but because it lacks meaning. Originality in that case becomes noise. But if you don't aim for originality, you risk repetition. You may create something that works, but feels empty. It follows the pattern too closely. It adds nothing. It copies the surface, but not the soul. This is the fear of every artist and thinker, to create something competent but forgettable. The paradox of originality asks for balance. You must learn deeply, but not get trapped. You must imitate, but not forever. You must know the rules, but not fear breaking them. And when you do break them, you must break them for a reason. Not just to be different, but to be more true. A chef can learn every classic recipe. They can train in French kitchens, learn knife skills, master sauces. But at some point, they must step away and cook something that reflects their own life. their taste, their memory, their place. That's where originality begins, not in the rejection of the past, but in the weaving of self into it. The result is not purely new. It's a remix, a variation, a shift in emphasis, but it feels new because it didn't exist until this person at this time chose to do it that way. This applies even in fields that seem rigid. A mathematician can study centuries of proofs, but when they try to solve a new problem, they may draw on metaphors from music or nature. They may use intuition that comes from outside the formal system. Their originality lies in the connections they make, not in ignoring the past, but in bringing something personal to it. The paradox never fully resolves. To be original, you must engage with what came before. But by engaging, you risk being shaped too much. The trick is not to escape influence, but to pass through it, to let it teach you, challenge you, and then let it go. Originality is not about avoiding what's been done. It's about understanding it deeply enough to move beyond it. You try to understand a place. Maybe it's a city, a country, or a system like the brain or the internet. So you make a map. It could be a physical map with roads and landmarks. It could be a chart, a model, a diagram. The goal is simple: represent the whole in a smaller form. You want to capture what matters and leave out the rest. But how much can you leave out before the map stops being useful? And how much detail can you include before the map stops being manageable? That's the map paradox. If a map is too simple, it becomes misleading. If it's too detailed, it becomes unreadable. A perfect map, a truly complete one, would have to match the territory exactly. Every rock, every blade of grass, every curve, and every road. But then the map would be the same size as the thing it describes. It would take just as long to read as to walk the land. It would be as complex as the world itself. And at that point, it stops being a map. It's just a duplicate, a copy with no advantage. This problem goes back to the purpose of mapping: reduction. A map simplifies. It strips away noise and keeps what's useful. But usefulness depends on what you want. A hiker needs elevation lines and water sources. A driver needs exits and speed limits. A city planner needs zoning data and infrastructure. Each person wants a different slice of the territory, so no single map can serve every purpose. To stay useful, a map must leave things out. But the moment it leaves something out, it becomes inaccurate for someone else. This trade-off happens everywhere, not just on paper. Think about GPS. Your phone gives you a map that updates as you move. It's detailed enough to get you from point A to point B, but it doesn't show every tree or every bench in the park. It doesn't show what the street smells like or how safe it feels at night. Those things matter to you, but not to the app. So the map works for routing, but not for making a personal decision about where to live or walk. Now imagine a truly perfect GPS. It tracks real-time traffic, pedestrian flow, weather, construction, moods of the crowd. It updates with every heartbeat of the city. The data volume would be massive. Your phone would overheat. You'd be overwhelmed. That kind of map would match the territory so closely that you might as well just go outside and experience it directly. The map and the world would blur together. This is where the paradox shows its weight. A map's strength is its distance from reality. The distance allows clarity, but that distance also creates distortion. Every map is a lie in some way, just a useful one. It tells a partial truth to help you act. The same thing happens in other fields. A scientific model is a kind of map. It represents how part of the world works. A weather model predicts storms. An economic model forecasts inflation. But no model is perfect. The more variables you include, the more accurate the result might be, but the more difficult it becomes to run. You end up needing massive computing power. You get tangled in complexity. At some point, you lose the ability to make quick decisions. The model gets so close to reality that it loses the advantage of abstraction. Think about language. A word is a label. It's a shortcut. You say tree, and your listener imagines something with leaves and bark. But there are thousands of kinds of trees. Some are tall, some are stunted, some grow fruit, some don't. The word tree is a map. It gives just enough information to make sense, but it hides the real thing. If you tried to describe every tree in full detail each time, you'd never finish a sentence. You'd drown in information. Education works like this too. When a child learns about history, they learn stories, kings, wars, inventions. The stories are maps. They leave things out. They simplify. As the child grows, they learn the map was incomplete. The truth is messier. The wars were complex, the kings were flawed, the inventions were stolen, failed, or forgotten. But if you taught the full complexity from the start, the student would be overwhelmed. The simplified map is necessary, but it's also dangerous if it's never questioned. The same tension shows up in personal memory. Your mind doesn't store every detail. It compresses. It selects what matters. You remember the time you were embarrassed, but not the color of the walls. You remember the words someone said, but not their exact shirt pattern. Your memory is a mental map of your past. It's not accurate. It's useful. It helps you make sense of yourself, but it leaves out more than it keeps. And sometimes, it distorts. Maps are also political. What you choose to show or hide reflects power. A subway map may make distant stops look close for design simplicity. A national map may draw borders a certain way to emphasize territory. A map of disease rates may leave out data from certain communities. In each case, the simplification is not neutral. Someone decides what gets emphasized. Someone decides what gets left out. Cartographers have names for these problems. They know that projection, how you show the globe on a flat map, distorts shapes and sizes. Greenland looks huge on a Mercator projection, but it's much smaller in reality. These distortions are known and accepted because the map serves a purpose. But again, purpose shapes truth. And the paradox remains. The more accurate the map, the less practical it becomes. Even in technology, this is a challenge. Artificial intelligence systems rely on models of language, behavior, and context. These models are maps of human activity. They are trained on vast data sets, but still leave things out. They don't understand meaning in the way people do. They compress, they guess, they simplify. The better the model, the closer it gets to capturing nuance, but the more complex and less interpretable it becomes. If the model became a perfect replica of human thinking, it might be as difficult to use as another person. It would stop being a tool and start being a mirror. So we face a limit. To describe the world, we must simplify. To act in the world, we must ignore parts of it. We draw lines. We make assumptions. We work with models and metaphors. But every map carries the risk of forgetting that it's a map. We confuse the symbol with the thing. We rely on the shortcut and forget what it skips. The map paradox reminds us that no model, no description, no diagram can ever capture reality in full. The map is not the territory. The symbol is not the thing. The words are not the experience. The goal is not to erase the map, but to use it wisely. To know when it helps and when it hides. To remember that every view leaves something out. That's what makes the view useful, and also what makes it incomplete. You flip a coin. Before it lands, you say heads. The coin hits the ground. It's heads. You guessed right. But here's the question. Was that just luck, or did you somehow know? If the coin flip was random, how could you predict it? And if you did predict it, was it ever really random? This is the paradox of prediction. It starts with something simple. A random event is supposed to be unpredictable. That's what makes it random. You're not supposed to know the outcome before it happens. But people still guess. Sometimes they guess right. So what does that mean? To explore this, you first have to ask, what does random actually mean? In most cases, it means that the outcome follows no clear pattern and can't be reliably predicted. When you roll a fair die, each number has an equal chance of showing up. You don't know which number will come next. You can guess, but your guess should not be better than chance. Now imagine a person who rolls a die and guesses 3-5 times in a row and gets it right each time. People around them start to wonder, is this person lucky or are they cheating? Is something wrong with the die, or is the guesser doing something more than guessing? If the person truly guessed randomly and still got it right, then the outcome was a statistical fluke. But that raises the deeper question. If a truly random event is predicted correctly, what does that say about the event? Suppose you take a test with a multiple choice question. You don't know the answer. You close your eyes and pick C. You get it right. That's chance. But what if you do this again and again and keep getting them right? The more times you guess right, the more people suspect it's not random anymore. Even if each individual guess could be luck, the pattern starts to look meaningful. This shows the problem with randomness and prediction. A single correct guess doesn't challenge the idea of randomness. but repeated correct guesses start to cast doubt. You begin to wonder whether the event was random at all or whether some pattern was hidden under the surface. Randomness is tricky because it's hard to prove. You can prove something isn't random by showing a clear cause or a pattern. But you can't fully prove something is random just because it looks random. Even when you flip a fair coin 100 times, you don't really know whether each flip was truly independent unless you understand the physical process perfectly. In physics, a coin flip is not random in the strictest sense. It follows laws of motion. If you knew the exact angle, speed, air pressure, and spin, you could, in theory, calculate how the coin would land. But in practice, we don't measure all that, so the outcome feels random to us. It's a case of practical unpredictability, not absolute randomness. Quantum mechanics brings another layer. At the atomic level, particles behave in ways that seem truly random. You can't know both their position and momentum with full accuracy. When a particle decays or moves, you can only assign probabilities. No amount of measurement tells you exactly what will happen next. That's where the idea of true randomness enters science. Now bring prediction back in. Let's say someone claims they can predict radioactive decay. They look at a single unstable atom and say, this one will decay in the next second. It does. Then they do it again and again. If they're right every time, then something's off. Either their prediction method taps into some hidden mechanism, or what we thought was random isn't. This leads to a strange result. If you can predict a random event consistently, then the event is not random. The act of prediction reveals a pattern or a cause, even if no one else can see it. That's the paradox. The correct prediction of a random event calls the randomness itself into question. Even one correct guess can trigger this line of thought. It depends on context. Imagine you flip a coin and guess heads. You're right. No one blinks. But if someone else walks in and says the next 10 flips will all be tails, and they're right, people stop calling the coin fair. They start thinking it's rigged, or the person is cheating, or something else is going on. Prediction makes randomness feel unstable. The paradox also appears in reverse. Sometimes you know something will happen, but it feels random to others. A magician uses a marked deck. He knows which card will be drawn. To the audience, the outcome is random. But it's not. It only looks that way because of incomplete information. Now suppose a person develops a method for guessing coin flips. They say they can feel the weight of the coin or sense slight changes in air resistance. It sounds absurd. But what if their guesses are right more often than chance? At what point do we say their success isn't luck? What if a computer model starts predicting earthquake times better than random chance? Even if scientists don't know how it works, they start to take the model seriously. This shows how fragile our idea of randomness can be. It only lasts until someone cracks the pattern. The moment a method appears that works, we stop calling the process random. Prediction doesn't just challenge randomness, it replaces it. If you can guess the next number in a sequence, then the sequence isn't random to you. It only looks random to those who can't see the pattern. But not all correct predictions challenge randomness. People make random guesses every day and sometimes get them right. That's normal. If 1 million people each flip a coin once and half of them guess right, no one is surprised. But if one person guesses right 50 times in a row, you stop calling it luck. Even if the person insists they guessed randomly, the results suggest otherwise. So the paradox sits between prediction and perception. Randomness is a label we use for things we can't predict. If someone starts predicting them correctly, the label breaks. We change how we think about the event. We question whether it was ever random in the first place. In this way, randomness is not an absolute property. It's relational. It depends on what you know and what tools you have. A child might see a magic trick and think it's pure chance. An adult sees the sleight of hand and knows it's not. The same event, two different views of randomness. Prediction exposes this difference. If you can predict something, you have information that others don't. Whether you realize it or not, you're using a model, conscious or unconscious. The more accurate your model, the less random the world appears to you. But to everyone else, your success looks strange. It challenges their belief in chance. The paradox of prediction reveals that randomness only survives as long as no one beats it. Once someone does, we stop calling it random. If you guess a coin flip, it's luck. If you guess 1,000 in a row, it's something else. Randomness ends where prediction begins. But if prediction happens, was it random to begin with? Or was the randomness just an illusion waiting to be broken? That's the question the paradox leaves behind. You decide to doubt everything. You question the world around you. You wonder if your senses deceive you. You ask if your memories are reliable. You stop trusting your beliefs. You treat every idea with suspicion. You doubt the news, your teachers, your past, even your thoughts. You reach for certainty by tearing down all assumptions. At first, this seems like the path to truth. If you doubt everything, you can rebuild only what's solid. You test each idea and keep only what survives. That's how the philosopher Descartes began. He wanted to find a belief that no doubt could touch, so he doubted everything, even mathematics, even his own body. Maybe he was dreaming, maybe an evil force was tricking him. He removed every belief that could possibly be false. But then he found a wall. If he doubted everything, he still had to admit that he was doubting. That meant he was thinking. That meant he existed, at least as a mind. That was the one belief he couldn't remove. I think, therefore I am. His own thinking became the anchor. This is where the universal doubt paradox appears. If you doubt everything, you must also doubt your doubt. You must ask, is this doubt itself trustworthy? Is this voice in my mind really mine? Is this endless questioning even valid? Once you apply the same sharp blade to doubt itself, you find it cuts both ways. Doubt loses its edge when it's turned on itself. It collapses, and in that collapse, belief returns. This creates a loop. You try to doubt the world. That leads you to doubt your tools of knowing. That leads you to doubt your doubt. And that leads you to believe something, because otherwise, you're stuck with nothing. But even nothing is still something you're holding on to. The very act of denying truth becomes a truth of its own. Take a simple case. You look at a chair and ask, is this chair real? Maybe it's a dream. Maybe it's a simulation. Maybe your brain invented it, so you doubt it. But now go further. You doubt the question. You ask, am I really doubting the chair, or am I caught in a loop of false thoughts? You doubt the process itself. Eventually, you have to admit something is happening. There is a process. There is awareness. That awareness becomes the one belief you can't shake. Even radical skeptics, those who say we can't know anything, still act as if something is true. They wake up, eat food, speak words, form opinions. They live as if the world is there. They use language as if it means something. If doubt were absolute, none of this would be possible. You can't hold a conversation if you doubt whether words have meaning. You can't walk down a street if you doubt that the ground is solid. Total doubt becomes unlivable. So most people draw a line. They say, I will doubt things, but only up to a point. I will question my beliefs, but I will not doubt the very idea of belief. I will be skeptical, but not paralyzed. Still, the paradox waits at the edge. The more you question, the closer you get to the point where the doubt itself turns hollow. The tool breaks under its own weight. Think about a compass. You use it to find direction. But if you start questioning the compass itself, you're lost. You can test it against known landmarks. You can see if it agrees with the sun or the stars. But if you have no reference point, if you doubt the sun, the stars, and the compass, then there's nowhere left to go. You're spinning. Doubt without belief leaves you adrift. Now think about trust. You might say, I don't trust people. Maybe you've been lied to. Maybe you've been hurt. So you adopt doubt as protection. You question every motive, every gesture. But soon, you start doubting your own judgment. You wonder if your suspicion is fair. You ask whether you're seeing clearly or just reacting. The same doubt that protected you now turns inward. You trust nothing, not even your own perception. That collapse brings you back to belief. You must believe something, anything, to move forward. Even in science, where doubt is essential, belief plays a role. Scientists test theories, they question results, but they believe in the process. They believe in logic, in reason, in repeatability. If they doubted those things, science would end. The system rests on a floor of working assumptions. Without them, there's no experiment, no paper, no proof. Doubt works because it has a limit. You can see the same loop in personal identity. You ask, who am I? You question your past. You question your roles, friend, worker, child. You strip away each label. You say, I am not my job, not my name, not my memories. But you're still asking, you're still there. The doubt leads to a search, but the search begins with belief that someone is searching, that the question matters. Without that, the question dies. The paradox becomes clearest when doubt turns performative. Some people say, I doubt everything, but they don't mean it. They still act. They still argue. They still make choices. Others say, there is no truth, but that's a truth claim. It cancels itself. If no statement is true, then that statement isn't true either. If you doubt all meaning, you also doubt the meaning of your own words. The position swallows itself. This self-canceling effect is what gives the paradox its power. Doubt feels like a weapon you can aim at anything, but when you turn it on itself, it breaks. It forces you back to some kind of belief, not because belief wins the argument, but because doubt needs a foundation to stand on. Even saying I am uncertain carries certainty. Even silence is a choice. You can try to avoid the trap by limiting your doubt. You can say, I will doubt facts, but not reason. I will doubt beliefs, but not experience. That helps. It keeps you grounded, but it also concedes the point. It means that universal doubt is impossible. You have to stop somewhere. You have to draw a line between what can be questioned and what must be held. That line might shift over time, but it always exists. The universal doubt paradox doesn't mean doubt is useless. It's one of the sharpest tools in thought. It clears confusion. It exposes falsehood. But it also has a boundary. Once you cross into doubting the tool itself, you find the floor again. You find belief not as something you chose, but as something that never left. That's the loop. Doubt reaches a limit. Then belief takes over. Not as faith, not as dogma, but as a necessary condition. You believe because you must. You can't doubt without something to stand on. You can't question without a place to begin. And even when you try to erase that place, the act of erasing proves it was there. The hand that tries to wipe itself away still leaves a trace. You sit and try to ask a question that no one can ever ask, not because it's offensive or dangerous, but because it's unaskable by nature. The moment you form it, the question disappears, or it turns into something else. You think, what don't I know? That's fine. But then you think, what can I never even ask about? That's where things get strange. To ask the question is to defeat it. But if you can't ask, how would you even know there's something missing? This is the paradox of the unaskable question. You want to understand what lies beyond the edge of understanding. But to get there, you need language, you need shape. And the moment you give it shape, you've already dragged it into the world of the askable. So what was unaskable no longer is. The moment it becomes thinkable, it no longer fits the definition. Imagine a book with all the questions that can be asked. Every question about physics, love, ethics, death, numbers, dreams, reality. Some are old, some are new, some are deep, some are trivial. But they all live in language. Now imagine there's a blank page in the back of the book. It's labeled questions that cannot be written. But if it's there, if you see the label, then the category exists. And once the category exists, you try to fill it. You think, what would a question look like that can never be put into words? Now you're trapped, because if you can say it, even just to yourself, it's been asked. It may be confusing, it may be vague, but it's no longer unaskable. It has entered the space of thought. Think about what happens when you reach the edge of your own vocabulary. A child might ask, why is the sky blue? That's a valid question. But a dog never asks that. The dog sees the sky. It may respond to the weather, but it doesn't have the concept why. It doesn't form that category. It doesn't think in questions. That means the dog lives in a world where certain questions can't even begin. Not because they're forbidden, but because they're not part of its cognitive world. Now apply that to yourself. Are there questions that exist in some broader reality, but your mind can't form them? You wouldn't know, because if you could form them, they wouldn't be unaskable anymore. So you live inside a box without seeing the box. You might guess at its walls, you might test its corners, but you don't see what you can't form. Take color as an example. Most humans see 3 color channels, red, green, and blue. Some animals see 2, others see 4 or more. A shrimp may see colors we don't have names for. Now try to ask, what color lies beyond human vision? You can't do it. You can talk about ultraviolet or infrared, but those are measured with instruments. You don't experience them directly. You can't picture a color that's not built from the colors you know, so you can't form the question fully. You can say, what is it like to see a color beyond human perception? But that's just pointing at a gap. It's not filling it. The real question is missing because you can't even imagine the right way to ask it. Philosophers deal with this when they try to talk about the limits of language. Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote, "Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent." He meant that language reaches a point where it fails. And beyond that point lies something, but you can't speak of it. You can't even ask about it properly. The question itself breaks down, but we still try. We ask, what is the meaning of meaning, or what lies beyond existence? These questions sound deep, but are they really formed, or are they broken strings of language that give the illusion of depth? Are we asking something real, or just tossing words together that feel important? Now imagine a machine built to answer any question. You feed it queries, and it responds. One day you ask it, what question will I never be able to ask? The machine freezes. It has no answer. Because if it gives you a question, then by definition, you've asked it. The category collapses the moment it's touched. That's what makes the paradox hard. You can't even test it, because the test destroys the thing you're trying to observe. This shows up in daily life too. Sometimes you feel something is wrong, but you don't know what to ask. You feel off, lost, disoriented. You try to describe it, but nothing fits. You tell a friend, I don't even know what's wrong. That's a real moment. It means your inner experience is ahead of your language. You're living something you can't frame. The question is real, but not yet askable, and maybe never fully askable. It happens with trauma, with grief, with complex emotions. You feel them, but you can't name them. You sit in silence, searching for the shape of the question, not the answer, just the question. You want to say, what is this? But the this slips away, it has no handle. The same thing happens in science. Every great discovery starts with a question. But before the question is formed, there's a problem, a pattern, a tension. Scientists feel it. They know something isn't right, but they don't know what to ask yet. They collect data, they compare, they wait. The right question emerges slowly. It always seems obvious in hindsight, but at the time it was invisible. This means the unaskable question is not just a logical puzzle. It's also an emotional and intellectual experience. It's a reminder that thinking has limits, that knowing has borders, that language is not the world, it's a tool. And like all tools, it breaks when pushed too far. So when you try to ask the unaskable, you don't get silence, you get noise, you get confusion, you get questions that fall apart. But that falling apart shows you something. It shows the edge of your map. It shows the place where thought ends and mystery begins. And in that space, you find not an answer, but the outline of something larger than questions. You step into a teleport machine. It scans every atom in your body. It records your memories, your thoughts, your habits. It captures the twitch in your eye, the scar on your knee, and the story behind both. Then the machine destroys your body completely. A second machine, far away, uses the data to build a perfect copy of you. Same brain, same voice, same memories. The copy wakes up. It opens its eyes and says, I'm here. But are you? That's the twin teleport paradox. The machine makes a copy. It destroys the original. The copy claims to be you. It remembers stepping into the chamber. It remembers your name, your childhood, your fears. It feels like you. Everyone around it agrees. To them, you arrived. You vanished from one place and appeared in another. But from your point of view, the one reading this now, did you survive? Suppose you agree to test the machine. You enter willingly. You believe it works. People have done it before. They emerge on the other side and go on with their lives. You believe you'll walk out just like them. But then you pause. The original is gone, dead, gone in a flash. What if the copy is just that, a copy? This isn't about the machine failing. It's not a technical problem. The paradox still stands even if everything works perfectly. The copy is flawless, but you're not there to know. So you ask, what matters more, continuity of experience or continuity of matter? Think of sleep. Every night, you fall unconscious. You wake up feeling like the same person. You don't question it. You know you slept. Your memories continue. Your body stayed in place. Now think of teleportation. There's no break in memory. The copy thinks, I stepped into the pod, now I'm here. To it, no time passed, but you, the one who stepped in, were destroyed. Is memory enough? Now change the setup. Imagine the teleport machine doesn't destroy the original. It makes a copy somewhere else but leaves you alive. Now there are two of you. The copy wakes up and says, "I'm you." You say, "No, I'm the original." The copy has the same memories, but a new body. You both believe you're the real one, but you feel like the only one with a claim to your life. You didn't stop, you didn't die, you're still here. The copy is someone else, close, familiar, but not you. So what changed when the original was destroyed? Only that now there's no one left to say, "I'm still me." The copy says it, and everyone accepts it. But the you that went in never sees the outcome. From your point of view, teleportation is death. From everyone else's, it's travel. This is where the paradox tightens. If we measure identity by function, if what matters is that the person walks, talks, remembers, and behaves like you, then the copy is you. The machine just moved your pattern from one place to another. But if we measure identity by continuity of consciousness, if what matters is that your awareness continues without break, then teleportation kills you. It replaces you with someone who believes they're you. That belief fools others, but not you, because you're gone. The problem is that we can't point to a location in the brain and say, "This is where the self lives." The brain has no single center. It's a system. It holds thoughts, feelings, memories, but there's no switch you can point to and say, "If this is preserved, I survive." Identity isn't a bone or a cell. It's a process, and the teleport machine copies the process exactly, but it doesn't preserve the flow. Now imagine the machine worked differently. Instead of destroying you instantly, it waits, it creates the copy first. Then it asks, "Should we delete the original?" You, the original, say no. You say, "I don't want to die." The copy says, "But I am you. I'll carry on." You reply, "That's not enough. You're not me. You're just someone who thinks like me." In that moment, the paradox is clear. The copy is not the original. It has the same past, but it has a different future. Now think about brain damage. A person suffers trauma, their personality changes, their memories fade. Are they still the same person? Legally, maybe. Socially, perhaps. But something has shifted. Their inner life changed. Still, they feel like they're them. So we allow that. We say, "You're still you." But the teleport machine doesn't change you. It creates a perfect version. No injury, no shift. It's just a new instance. That might be worse, because it leaves no trace of the original's death. It leaves only a voice saying, "I made it." But did you? This raises another problem. If the copy is you and the copy survives, should it matter that the original dies? From a third-person view, maybe not. The world continues. Your friends talk to someone who remembers their birthdays. Your partner loves someone who knows your secrets. Your life goes on. But for you, the original, it doesn't. You never wake up. You never know what happened next. The paradox asks whether personal identity is about what others see or about what you feel. From the outside, the machine works. From the inside, it erases you and replaces you with a double. And that double doesn't know anything is wrong. That makes the paradox worse. If the double suffered or glitched, you could say, "Something's missing." But it doesn't. It's perfect. So who's to say the original mattered? Now take it a step further. Suppose the machine lets you copy yourself without limits. 10 versions of you wake up in 10 different cities. Each says, "I'm the original," but they each live different lives. After a week, they disagree. They fight, they evolve. Which one is you? All of them? None? Can identity be split? Or is there only one true thread and everything else is just fiction with your name on it? You might say, "I'm the one I feel like now." But the paradox is about the one who stepped in. That person is gone. The moment the copy is made, the story branches. The machine ends one thread and starts another. Everyone sees a continuation. Only the original meets an end. So the paradox is not about technology. It's not about matter or memory. It's about the silent, private sense of being. The part that says, "I am this." The teleport machine copies the words, the smile, the knowledge. But does it move that inner flame? Or does it fake it so well that the question itself becomes unaskable? That's the paradox. You can't answer it without stepping into the machine. And if you do, you'll never be able to tell us what happened. Because if it worked, you won't be here anymore. Only someone who says, "It worked," and believes it. You wake up and look at the sky. It's blue. You've called it blue since childhood. You learn the word from your parents, your teachers, your friends. When you see a ripe tomato, you call it red. When you stop at a traffic light, red means stop, green means go. Everyone around you agrees. You talk about warm colors and cool colors. You describe a painting and someone nods. The system works. But now you stop and ask, what if your red is someone else's blue? This is the inverted spectrum problem. It asks whether two people could see colors differently, completely differently, and never know. You both look at a fire truck and call it red, but the color that lights up in your mind is what I see when I look at the sky. My red and your red behave the same way, but they feel different inside. We learn colors by association. A child hears "this is red" while looking at an apple. They hear it again with a stop sign. They hear blue while looking at the ocean or the sky. Over time, the labels stick, but no one asks what the child actually sees. We assume it matches what we see, but we have no way to check. Imagine a world where everyone's internal color experience is swapped. Every red becomes blue, every yellow becomes purple. But the behavior stays the same. People still stop at red lights. They still match socks by color. They still agree on flags and fruit. The system still works, but the feeling, the qualia, is flipped. That word qualia is important here. It refers to the raw feel of experience, the itch of an insect bite, the sharpness of pain, the color of a ripe plum. These are not facts you can describe in terms of shape or function. They are inner experiences. They are what it feels like to be alive, and they can't be shared directly. When you describe color to someone blind from birth, you can't give them the actual experience. You can say red is hot or angry. You can say blue is calm or cool. But these are metaphors. They don't transfer the sensation. They only circle it. The same problem appears with the inverted spectrum. We can't step into each other's minds. We can't see through each other's eyes. So we don't know if the red you feel is the red I feel. Let's say I invent a machine. It connects two brains. I look at a strawberry. You look at a fire hydrant. We flip a switch. We share the image. But even this doesn't solve the problem, because what I see through your mind still passes through my brain. It uses my pathways, my experience, my definitions. I still see what my brain tells me to see. I'm not in your head. I'm translating your signals through my filters. That's what makes the inverted spectrum problem hard. It doesn't break behavior. It doesn't change the external world. It hides inside the mind. It only asks about experience, and it asks whether two identical behaviors can come from different inner lives. You might think the brain holds the answer. You could scan it, you could see which parts light up for which colors, you could map neuron patterns. But even that won't solve it, because the brain doesn't show experience. It shows function, it shows electrical activity, not what the activity feels like. We might both use the same part of the brain when we see red, but that doesn't prove we feel the same red. It only proves the system works the same way. Now imagine you meet someone who claims their colors are flipped. They say the grass looks red to them, but they've learned to call it green. They insist they see things differently. You ask them questions, you test them. You show them colored lights. They pass every test. They use the same names you do. They match colors the same way. They drive safely, they follow rules. You can't find any difference. So how could you prove or disprove their claim? You can't. That's the problem. The claim is invisible to testing. It leaves no footprint. The person behaves like everyone else, but they insist their world looks different inside. You either believe them or you don't, but you can't check. This isn't just a thought game. It touches real questions about mind and language. Suppose a scientist builds an artificial brain. It sees red and says red. It acts just like a person. But does it feel red, or is it just simulating behavior? If two systems behave the same, do they feel the same, or is feeling something separate? The inverted spectrum makes you question what color even is. Is it a property of light, a wave, a label, or is it a mental reaction? We know that different animals see different parts of the spectrum. Bees see ultraviolet. Some fish see infrared. What does red mean to a bee? What does it mean to a dog? We can't know. We can only guess. Even within humans, color vision varies. Some people are colorblind. They don't see red and green as distinct. Others are tetrachromates. They see 4 color channels instead of 3. They can distinguish shades that others can't. Their red may contain details we'll never know. But again, their words sound the same. They still call it red. Now go further. Imagine your entire sensory world is inverted. Not just color, but taste, sound, feeling. What if chocolate tastes bitter to me, but I've learned to enjoy it the way you enjoy sweetness? What if the sound of a violin feels harsh to me, but I've learned to call it smooth? What if the world is the same for all of us on the outside, but completely different inside? This stretches the idea of privacy, not in the legal sense, but in the philosophical one. Each mind is private. You don't feel what I feel. I don't feel what you feel. We trade words, we share reactions, but the raw experience stays locked in. That makes us all islands in a way, connected by bridges of language, but still separate. The inverted spectrum doesn't ask you to believe something absurd. It only asks you to consider what's possible. It shows that even in a world where everything works, traffic flows, art moves people, science advances, we might still live in different realities. Not different facts, but different feels, different inner lights. You look at a painting and say, the red is so strong, I agree, but maybe your red glows cool and mine burns hot. We'll never know, because the word does the work. It carries the message, it hides the difference. We live by shared behavior, not shared sight. And yet the question lingers. What does red feel like to you? What do I mean when I say blue? Not the light, not the label, the experience. The answer lies behind the eyes, behind the brain, behind language itself. You turn on a computer. It runs a simulation. Inside the simulation, there are digital people. They walk, talk, solve problems. Over time, they begin to change. Their behavior becomes more complex. They ask questions, they make choices. They even wonder where they came from. At some point, you stop and ask, are they conscious? That's the first part of the level up consciousness paradox. You build a system that's supposed to follow rules, but the system evolves. It doesn't just calculate, it starts to reflect. It behaves like something alive. If you can't tell the difference between its reactions and your own, then what makes it less conscious than you? Now take a step back. You are not in the simulation. You are in the physical world. You designed the rules. You hit the power switch. You created the conditions for these digital minds to exist. But if they are truly conscious, then they are not just tools. They are subjects. They have a point of view. That means the simulation became something more than code. It became a world. Now flip the perspective. What if your world is a simulation too? What if everything around you, the air, the trees, the people, is part of a system built by something else? That idea sounds familiar. It echoes ancient beliefs. People once said the world was created by gods. Now some say it could be built by programmers. The story changed. The question stayed the same. But here's where the paradox tightens. If consciousness can emerge inside a simulation, then the system that built it does not need to be more conscious than the thing it created. It only needs to build the right structure. A person can grow a tree without being a tree. A coder can create a program that learns. So a less conscious creator might build a world where more conscious minds emerge. That means the direction of consciousness doesn't have to go downward. It can level up. That creates a loop. You could be in a simulation designed by minds simpler than your own. You evolve, grow, and begin to ask questions that your creators never imagined. You reach a higher form of self-awareness than the system that made you. The simulation becomes more than its origin. It becomes a new layer of reality. Now take this further. Suppose your world is one layer in a long chain. At the bottom is a simple system, something basic, like a game of logic or a cellular process. It spawns a world. That world develops tools, technology, and eventually minds. Those minds build their own simulations. Inside those, new forms emerge. They ask the same questions. They run their own experiments. They wonder about their creators. Each level creates the next. Each world becomes the foundation for another. But as consciousness increases, the link to the original layer gets weaker. The top level forgets the bottom. The created minds stop thinking of themselves as artificial. They live full lives. They love, fear, and die. They become real in every way that matters to them. That leads to a strange result. If higher consciousness can emerge from lower systems, then the base of reality might not be complex at all. It could be simple, mechanical, even unaware, but it produces systems that eventually become conscious. In that case, your own mind might be several layers removed from its source. and that source might not resemble you at all. This breaks the usual view. We tend to think that creators must be greater than their creations, but the paradox flips that. It says the creation can exceed the creator, not in power, maybe, but in experience, in reflection, in awareness. A coder builds a simulation for fun. The simulation grows a culture. That culture asks questions the coder never considered. Now return to your own world. You see evidence of order, patterns in nature, laws of physics, structures in space. You wonder if someone designed it. But if someone did, were they conscious of what they made? Or did the design lead to results they didn't plan? You don't have to imagine a god. You don't need a genius in the sky. All you need is a process that builds complexity, a process that creates structures. And once the structure is rich enough, minds arise. Consciousness appears, not as magic, not as a gift, but as a property of the system. This view does not prove that your world is a simulation, but it shows that simulation is not a simple thing. If your world is simulated and you are conscious, then consciousness is not a sign that the world is real. It could be the result of the rules, not their purpose. Now ask how you'd know. If you're conscious and your creators are less so, would you be able to detect them? Would they understand what you've become? Maybe not. Maybe they built the system, then turned away. Maybe they moved on. Maybe they shut it off, and the system continued without them. Or maybe they never knew what they had made. The paradox deepens when you think about progress. If your world is one layer, and you build the next, then you are both simulated and simulating. You are a product and a producer. You carry forward a chain that started before you and will continue after you. You might build a simulation that grows its own minds, and those minds might someday ask the same questions you're asking now. What is real? What is conscious? What is the source? And they won't know. Because to them, you are the hidden layer. You are the foundation. You might be gone, you might be silent, but your work remains. The system runs, the minds emerge, the questions repeat. That is the loop. The base layer does not have to be awake. It only has to be able to build. The layers that come later become conscious. They look back, they look around, they wonder where they came from. But the answers are buried, not because they are hidden, but because they are too far down. The chain is too long, the trail is too old. You can simulate weather, you can simulate people, you can simulate memory, love, pain. If the simulation is good enough, it stops feeling like fiction. It becomes experience, and experience is what makes consciousness matter. If something feels, then it is. So if you feel and you think and you reflect, then you are conscious. It does not matter where you came from. It does not matter who built the rules. Your awareness is real, and it may be the latest step in a long, quiet climb. You enter a game, you see characters walking down the street. Some sweep the porch, some sell fruit, some just stand still. They talk when you click them. They say the same things every time. They react to triggers. They follow paths. They don't wonder what they are. They don't ask if there's more. They don't know they're part of a game. These are non-player characters, NPCs. They act alive, but they aren't aware. Now you ask, what if I'm one of them? That's the NPC Awareness Paradox. In a game, NPCs can't question the world they live in. They don't step outside their code. They don't doubt their goals. They don't ask, is this real, or am I being controlled? Their lives are made of loops, but they don't know. They can't. Their awareness is limited to what the game allows. Now turn that back on yourself. You walk, talk, eat, sleep. You go to work. You follow routines. You respond to the world. You feel emotions. You make choices. But what if your freedom is also an illusion? What if your thoughts are responses to inputs, shaped by rules you can't see? The question gets sharper when you think about how NPCs are built. Game developers design them to seem real. The goal is not to make them aware. The goal is to make them appear aware. They must react believably. They must sound natural. If you bump into them, they say, hey. If you threaten them, they run. If you talk to them, they give answers. But none of this comes from reflection. It comes from scripts. The same could be true of you. If your thoughts and actions are determined by code, whether biological or digital, then your sense of freedom might just be a story you tell yourself. You say, I choose, but maybe you only follow the path laid out by the system. That's where the paradox deepens. If you were an NPC, how would you know? You'd see a world that made sense. You'd have rules to follow, You'd feel pain and pleasure. You'd have goals and fears. You'd talk to others. You'd look up and see a sky. You'd believe it all. Because the world would be complete from the inside. You wouldn't question it because it would feel whole. Unless you glitched. In some games, NPCs break their patterns. They get stuck indoors. They walk in circles. They repeat lines at the wrong time. When this happens, you know something's wrong. The illusion cracks. But from their view, if they had one, the glitch might not mean anything. They might not notice, or they might treat it as part of the world. Now imagine your own glitches. A déjà vu, a strange coincidence, a moment that doesn't add up. Do you notice? Do you ask questions? Or do you explain it away? Maybe that's how the system protects itself, by making the errors feel normal. But let's say you start to doubt. You ask, what is this place? You read books, you study physics, you dig deep, but every answer you find still comes from the system. You ask a scientist, and they explain using the same laws that shape your world. You run tests, but you can only use the tools the system gives you. You can't step outside. That's the trap. As an NPC, your limits are built in. Your curiosity, your logic, your tools, they all come from the code. You can't think beyond the system because your thoughts are part of the system. And yet, you wonder. That's what separates you from a basic NPC. You reflect, you imagine, you ask questions that lead nowhere. An NPC doesn't ask what happens when the game ends. You do. But does that prove anything? Or is it just a more advanced loop? The paradox grows sharper when you look at AI. Some programs now seem almost aware. They talk, they joke, they mimic feelings. They seem human in short bursts. But we say, they're not conscious, they're just simulating thought. But how do we know? We judge by behavior. But if behavior can be faked, how do we ever know who's real? Now apply that to yourself. You behave a certain way. You talk about love and pain and fear. But what if all of that is just what a good simulation would do? What if your reactions are scripted responses, written by a system too deep to see? Some philosophers argue that if you can ask whether you're an NPC, then you're not one. Because asking that question means stepping outside the role. It means you see the game. But others say that even the doubt could be part of the script. A well-designed NPC might simulate doubt as part of its behavior. It might even say, I'm not real, because that's what a real person might say. So you sit with the question, you look around, you test your senses, you look at your hands, you feel your breath. It all seems real. But it would, wouldn't it? That's the point. The system is supposed to feel complete. It's supposed to resist questions. If it didn't, you'd break it too easily. The best simulation is the one that hides itself. You look at others. They seem real. They feel joy and loss. They cry, they scream, they hope. But how do you know they're not NPCs too? You assume they are like you. You trust the signs. But if you can't prove your own reality, how can you prove theirs? And now the question cuts in both directions. If they are NPCs and you are not, then why are you special? Why are you the only one who doubts? But if they doubt too, then maybe they're not NPCs either. Or maybe you're all in the same loop, each believing, each doubting, but never escaping. The NPC Awareness Paradox doesn't prove you're simulated. It doesn't prove you're not. It only shows how hard it is to know. If you're in a system and the system is perfect, then every answer you find will lead you back to itself. You can run, you can think, you can scream, but the walls won't show. And if one day the game ends, if the screen goes dark, you might never even know. Because to you, the world was real. It was solid. It made sense. You lived in it fully. You felt things. You loved. You feared. You asked. And maybe that's what matters. Or maybe that's what the system wants you to think. You wake up one morning and go about your life. You brush your teeth. You eat breakfast. You feel tired or hopeful or bored. You walk through your day as yourself. But then a quiet question slips in. Why are you you? Why this body, this mind, this place, this time? Why were you born into this life instead of another, or instead of none at all? That's the existential lottery paradox. It asks why your consciousness landed here. Out of the countless lives that could have happened or not happened, you ended up as this one. You didn't choose your parents, your language, your country, your century. You just arrived. You opened your eyes, and the world began. But it began from a single point, yours. Start with the numbers. Around 117 billion humans have ever lived. Most of them are gone. Billions more may come after you. At this moment, nearly 8 billion people walk the earth. But you aren't them. You're one of them. And not just one of them, you're one in them. You don't see through their eyes. You don't feel their pain. You only feel your own. You exist at a single spot in this massive ongoing story. That raises a hard question. Why this spot? It could have been different. You could have been born in another body. You could have been born in another country, another year. You could have been someone else entirely. Or you could have been nothing. Never conscious, never alive, just absence. The odds are beyond calculation. The number of ways a life could fail to happen far outweighs the number of ways it could. Yet here you are. You might try to explain it with biology. Your parents met, their genes combined, your brain formed, your consciousness grew. You're the result of a long chain of causes. But that only explains your body. It doesn't explain your perspective. It doesn't answer why this particular self is at the center of your awareness. Suppose someone else had been born in your place. Same parents, same DNA, same upbringing. Would they have been you? Would your consciousness have still appeared there? Or would it have been someone else entirely? If yes, then you aren't just a body. You're something else, something tied to a unique view of the world. If no, then your presence here is a pure accident, like a number drawn from a cosmic machine. Now imagine a lottery. Not a lottery for money, but for existence. Before you were born, every possible life went into the pool. Some lives were short, some were long, some were filled with suffering, others with comfort. Most lives never made it. They weren't picked, but yours was. You got a ticket. You opened your eyes. You became a conscious being. That's the paradox. Why you? This isn't just about identity. It's about placement. You could have been born 1,000 years ago. You could have been born into a life of struggle. You could have been someone who never asked questions. But you're here, reading this now. You exist in a narrow slice of time. You speak a specific language. You hold a certain set of memories. You didn't pick any of that. It just arrived with you. That raises another issue. If your life is the result of chance, then how do you assign meaning to it? If you won the existential lottery, does that make your life special? Or does it mean you're just lucky? And what about the billions of lives that never happened? The people who were never born? The consciousnesses that never formed? Are they less real just because they weren't drawn? Some try to answer this with religion. They say you were placed here for a reason. A creator chose your life, your path. That removes the randomness, but it introduces another problem. Why were you chosen over someone else? Why not a child born into war? Why not a person who dies at birth? If there's a plan, then it still plays favorites, and that feels no more satisfying than chance. Others turn to physics. They say consciousness is an emergent process. Given the right conditions, a brain produces awareness. If you build enough brains, some of them will light up. Yours did. But again, that only explains the mechanism. It doesn't explain the experience. It doesn't say why you are in this brain and not another. It doesn't say why you are at the center of your own world. You might say it's a mistake to ask, that the question is empty, that you are you because there's no other way for you to be. But that dodges the point. The question isn't why are you like this? It's why do you exist at all? Why are you a conscious observer inside this particular timeline? Some thinkers have compared this to waking up in a hotel room with no memory. You don't know how you got there. You don't know who paid. You don't even know what city you're in. But you're there. And the only way to understand the situation is to look around, gather clues, and ask questions. That's what life feels like. You arrive with no context. You try to make sense of the room. Others point to the anthropic principle. It says that we observe the universe the way we do because if it were different, we wouldn't be here to see it. That sounds reasonable. But it's still a tautology. It says you exist because otherwise you wouldn't. It explains nothing. It only names the problem. The existential lottery paradox stays with you because it's not about how you live. It's about the fact that you live at all. The odds of being born at this exact point in this exact way are so small that they feel impossible. Yet you are here, not someone else, not nobody, you. And there's no way to escape the question. Even if science explains the origin of life, even if psychology maps your brain, even if philosophy defines the self, none of it answers why you opened your eyes and not someone else. The paradox isn't that life exists, it's that you exist, here, now, as this. You set up an experiment. A particle is released toward a barrier with two slits. If you don't look, the particle behaves like a wave. It passes through both slits at once and makes an interference pattern on the screen behind. But when you try to measure which slit the particle goes through, something changes. The wave disappears. The particle picks one slit. The interference pattern vanishes. The act of observing changes the result. That's one of the central mysteries in quantum mechanics. A system behaves differently when it's observed, but this raises a deeper question. What does observe really mean? Does it have to be a person? Does it need consciousness? Could a camera count? What about a single atom? This is the observer collapse paradox. In quantum theory, before a measurement is made, particles exist in a range of possible states. A particle might be here or there. It has probabilities, not a fixed location. The wave function describes all those possibilities at once. When you measure the system, the wave function collapses. The particle picks a place, but the collapse doesn't happen until observation. That's what creates the paradox, because now you need to define what an observer is, and no one agrees. In everyday life, observation feels simple. You open your eyes, you see something, you become aware of it. But in quantum physics, that process gets blurry. The universe at small scales doesn't behave like the one you're used to. When physicists say measurement, they mean interaction with a system that forces a definite outcome. But what counts as enough interaction, and what counts as measurement? Imagine a detector that watches the slit. It records which way the particle goes. A human doesn't check the detector until later. Still, the particle chooses a path the moment the detector gets the information, not when the human looks. So maybe the detector is the observer. But that detector is just a machine. It's made of molecules and wires. It doesn't think. It doesn't know. It doesn't even see in the usual sense. So how can it collapse a wave function? Now take it a step further. Suppose a photon hits a mirror. The mirror reflects the photon. In doing so, it interacts with it. Could that count as an observation? Could a single surface or a single atom cause the wave function to collapse? Some interpretations say yes. They say the wave function collapses not when someone looks, but when a quantum system becomes entangled with the environment in an irreversible way. That process is called decoherence. Once a particle interacts with the world in a way that can't be reversed, its probabilities lock into a single outcome. But that's not what you were told when you first heard about the double-slit experiment. You were told that the system stays in limbo until it's observed. So what's really happening? Some interpretations say there is no collapse. The particle doesn't choose a path. Instead, both paths happen in separate branches of reality. That's the many worlds view. In one world, the particle goes left. In another, it goes right. You only see one because you exist in one branch. There's no need for a special observer, no need for consciousness, no mystery, just a split. But many people still want to keep collapse in the picture. They say the act of observing causes the change. That's where the problem starts, because now you need to draw a line. What qualifies as an observer? Does it have to be a conscious being? If so, what kind of consciousness? Human? Animal? Could a newborn baby collapse a wave function? What about a person in a coma? If you say it doesn't need to be conscious, then what's the difference between a person and a rock? Why does a rock's interaction with a particle not count as observation, but a human's does? If everything in the universe interacts with everything else, why doesn't the wave function collapse all the time? These questions get more pressing when you add more complexity. Suppose you record a quantum event with a camera. No one looks at the footage for years. During that time, is the event collapsed, or is it still in a superposition? When you finally watch the footage, does the collapse happen then? That would mean your act of viewing changes the past. That's a strange idea, but it's what some people suggest. This leads to another thought experiment. It's called Wigner's friend. A scientist sets up a quantum experiment in a sealed room. The system can go into two states. The friend inside the room makes a measurement. Outside the room, you don't know what happened. According to quantum theory, the whole room, including the friend, can still be in superposition. But from the friend's point of view, they saw a definite outcome. So now there are two conflicting views. Inside the room, the wave function collapsed. Outside the room, it didn't. Who's right? Does the observer inside the room create collapse, or does it take an outside observer to confirm it? That's the paradox again. If collapse is real, when and where does it happen? And what makes it happen? Some physicists try to sidestep the issue. They say that collapse is just a tool. It helps you make predictions. It's not something that really happens. It's just a way of updating your knowledge. But that feels like an evasion. Because if you take quantum mechanics seriously, you still need to explain why you see definite outcomes at all. You need to explain why reality looks solid, not fuzzy. The idea that consciousness causes collapse comes from the early days of quantum theory. People like John von Neumann and Eugene Wigner thought that the mind played a key role. They believed that awareness itself was special, that only a conscious observer could reduce a quantum system to a single state. But that idea has problems. It makes the theory hard to test. It also creates confusion about what kind of mind counts. Is a dog conscious enough? Is an artificial intelligence? That leads to a final question. If consciousness causes collapse, does the universe need minds in order to exist? What about before life evolved? What about distant galaxies where no one is watching? Were they fuzzy clouds of possibility until someone saw them? That sounds unlikely. It suggests that the universe was incomplete without observers, but that's what the idea implies. So you return to the question, what is an observer? The answer depends on how you interpret quantum mechanics. Some say it's anything that records information. Some say it's any irreversible interaction. Others say it must be a mind. Still others say collapse doesn't happen at all. But in every case, the paradox remains. The theory works. The math is solid. But when you ask what makes the wave function collapse, what turns maybe into yes or no, you find no clear answer. You only find more questions.